Welcome to the Whispering Tome.
Welcome to the banks of the Nile. Welcome, dear traveler, to a journey through time. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the warm Egyptian sun on your face, the gentle breeze carrying the scent of papyrus reeds, and the eternal sound of the Nile's waters flowing peacefully beside you. Today, we embark on a calm and contemplative exploration of daily life in ancient Egypt, one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations. For over 3,000 years, the ancient Egyptian civilization flourished along the banks of the Nile River, creating a society of extraordinary complexity, beauty, and endurance. While we often think of Egypt in terms of its grand monuments, the towering pyramids, and the enigmatic Sphinx, the true heart of this civilization beat in the rhythms of everyday life. It was in the homes of farmers and scribes, in the workshops of craftsmen, in the kitchens where bread was baked, and in the fields where barley grew under the endless sky. This is not a tale of pharaohs and battles, though they will appear in our story. This is a journey into the lives of ordinary people who lived extraordinary lives in a land that was, in many ways, a gift of the river. We will walk through their streets, enter their homes, share their meals, understand their hopes and fears, and discover that despite the vast gulf of time that separates us, the ancient Egyptians were, at their core, remarkably human. Our journey will be slow and thoughtful, like the Nile itself. We will not rush. Instead, we will allow ourselves to be immersed in the details, the textures, the sounds, and the sensations of life along the river. We will explore how people woke in the morning, what they ate for breakfast, how they dressed, how they worked, how they loved, how they raised their children, and how they understood their place in the cosmos. So settle in, relax, and let us begin our calm journey through time, to a land where the desert meets the river and where humanity built one of the most enduring civilizations the world has ever known. Chapter 1: The Gift of the Nile, Geography and the Foundation of Life. To understand daily life in ancient Egypt, we must first understand the Nile. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus famously called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and truer words have rarely been spoken. Without the Nile, there would have been no Egypt, no civilization, no daily life to explore. The river was everything: mother, provider, highway, and deity. The Nile River stretches over 4,000 miles from its sources in the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, making it one of the longest rivers in the world. But it is not merely the length that matters, it is the river's behavior, its annual rhythm, that made Egyptian civilization possible. Picture the ancient Egyptian landscape in your mind. To the east and west of the Nile stretched endless deserts, the Red Land, as the Egyptians called it, a realm of death where nothing grew and the sun beat down mercilessly. But along the river, a narrow strip of black, fertile soil created the Black Land, where life flourished in abundance. This ribbon of fertility was rarely more than a few miles wide, sometimes narrowing to just a few hundred yards, yet it supported millions of people across the millennia. Each year, like clockwork, the Nile would perform its miracle. Beginning in June, the river would start to rise, swollen by summer rains falling in the Ethiopian highlands, far to the south. By August, the Nile would overflow its banks, spreading across the floodplain, covering the fields with water. The Egyptians did not see this as a disaster, but a blessing. The flood, called Akhet, was the first season of the Egyptian year, a time of renewal and hope. As the waters receded in October, they left behind a rich, dark silt, mineral-rich sediment that had been carried thousands of miles from the heart of Africa. This silt was like nature's fertilizer, renewing the soil year after year without exhausting it. This was the secret of Egypt's agricultural abundance, the foundation upon which everything else was built. The Egyptian year was divided into 3 seasons, each of 4 months, each month of 30 days. After Akhet, the inundation, came Peret, the growing season, when farmers would plant their crops in the moist, fertile soil. Finally came Shemu, the harvest season, when the crops were gathered before the cycle began again. This rhythm dictated everything in Egyptian life, from religious festivals to administrative calendars, from the work of farmers to the projects of pharaohs. The Nile was not just a source of water and fertile soil. It was Egypt's highway, its main transportation route. Ancient Egypt had no horses until relatively late in its history, and the desert made overland travel difficult and dangerous. But the Nile provided a perfect natural highway. Even better, the river's current flows north toward the Mediterranean, while the prevailing winds blow south from the Mediterranean inland. This meant that boats could sail south with the wind and drift north with the current, making travel relatively easy in both directions. On any given day, the Nile would have been busy with traffic. Small fishing boats made of papyrus reeds bobbed on the water. Larger wooden ships transported grain, stone, and goods of all kinds. Ferries carried people and animals across the river. Royal barges, gilded and magnificent, carried officials and nobles on their business. The river connected the entire country, from the delta in the north, where the Nile split into many branches before reaching the sea, to the first cataract in the south, where rapids made further navigation impossible. The Egyptians organized their country based on the river's geography. Lower Egypt was the delta region in the north, where the Nile fanned out into multiple channels and the land was flat and marshy, rich with wildlife. Upper Egypt was the long, narrow valley to the south, where the river flowed through high cliffs and the strip of cultivatable land was sometimes no more than a mile or two wide. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt was one of the defining moments of Egyptian history, and pharaohs always styled themselves as rulers of the two lands. But the Nile was more than a geographical feature. It was a divine presence. The Egyptians worshipped the Nile as a god, called Hapi, depicted as a rotund, androgynous figure with a crown of papyrus or lotus flowers bearing offerings of food. Hapi was not one of the great gods of the official pantheon, but in many ways he was closer to people's hearts, for he brought the flood that meant life itself. The Egyptians understood that their existence was precarious, balanced on the knife's edge between the life-giving river and the deadly desert. Too little flooding and famine would follow. Too much and villages could be swept away and disease could spread. The ideal flood was one that reached a certain height, measured on nilometers, stone structures with marked measurements that allowed officials to predict the harvest and set tax rates accordingly. This dependence on the Nile shaped the Egyptian worldview in profound ways. They saw the world as fundamentally ordered, governed by Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The Nile's annual flooding was proof of this order, evidence that the gods maintained the universe's proper functioning. When the flood came as expected, it confirmed that Ma'at prevailed. When it failed, it suggested that disorder, or Isfet, was threatening the world, and urgent measures, both practical and religious, were needed to restore balance. Living along the Nile also meant living with its wildlife. The river and its banks teemed with life. Hippos, dangerous and unpredictable, wallowed in the shallows. Crocodiles, revered and feared as the god Sobek, basked on muddy banks. Flocks of waterfowl, ibises, herons, and ducks crowded the marshes. Fish of many varieties filled the waters. The papyrus thickets provided homes for countless birds and small animals. The desert, though harsh, had its own inhabitants: lions, jackals, snakes, and scorpions. For the average Egyptian, the Nile was not just a backdrop to life, it was life itself. Farmers depended on its floods. Fishermen drew their livelihood from its waters. Children played along its banks. Women washed clothes in its shallows. The river was where people bathed, drew drinking water, and sometimes met their fate, whether through drowning, crocodile attack, or disease. But it was also where life happened, where communities gathered, where the rhythms of existence played out day after day, year after year, century after century. As we continue our journey, keep the Nile in mind. Imagine its presence, constant and eternal. Hear the sound of its waters, feel its cool relief in the desert heat, and understand that everything we will explore, every aspect of Egyptian daily life, flowed from this single, magnificent river. Chapter 2: The Social Pyramid: Understanding Egyptian Society. To understand daily life in ancient Egypt, we must understand the society's structure, for where you stood in the social hierarchy determined almost everything about your life: what you ate, where you lived, what clothes you wore, what work you did, and even how you would be buried when you died. Ancient Egyptian society is often depicted as a pyramid, and this is apt, not only because of Egypt's famous monuments, but because the structure was indeed hierarchical, with the vast majority at the bottom and a tiny elite at the top. However, unlike a pyramid of stone, this social structure had some flexibility, and movement between levels was possible, though not common. At the very apex stood the pharaoh, who was not merely a king, but a living god, the incarnation of Horus on earth, and the son of Ra, the sun god. The pharaoh was the ultimate authority in all matters: religious, political, military, and judicial. In theory, all land belonged to the pharaoh, all harvests were his, and all people were his subjects. The pharaoh maintained ma'at, cosmic order, through proper performance of rituals and just governance. When the pharaoh was strong and capable, Egypt prospered. When the pharaoh was weak, chaos could ensue. The pharaoh did not rule alone, of course. Immediately below him was a complex bureaucracy of officials, the most important of whom was the vizier, the chief minister who oversaw the government's daily operations. The vizier was like the prime minister, handling everything from tax collection to judicial appeals, from supervising building projects to managing the grain stores that were Egypt's insurance against famine. Below the vizier were numerous other officials: regional governors called nomarchs, who administered Egypt's provinces, or nomes; treasury officials who collected taxes and managed the royal wealth; generals who commanded the army; and countless scribes who kept the records that made the whole system function. These officials and scribes formed what we might call the upper middle class of Egyptian society, people of considerable status and comfort, though not royalty themselves. The priesthood occupied a special place in this hierarchy. Priests and priestesses served the gods in the temples, performing the daily rituals that were believed to keep the cosmic order functioning. The high priests of major temples, especially the high priest of Amun-Ra at Karnak, could wield enormous power and wealth. But there were also lower-ranking priests, part-time ritualists who served in the temples for a portion of the year and returned to their regular occupations the rest of the time. The nobility, often related to the pharaoh by blood or marriage, formed another elite group. They held large estates, employed many servants, and lived lives of considerable luxury. Some nobles held official positions in the government or military. Others lived as wealthy landowners, overseeing agricultural operations and enjoying the fruits of their estates. Below the elite, but still privileged, were skilled craftsmen, sculptors, painters, jewelers, carpenters, metalworkers, and other artisans. These were the people who created the beautiful objects we see in museums today, from intricate jewelry to stunning furniture, from exquisite statues to elaborately painted coffins. Skilled craftsmen could be well respected and relatively well off, especially if they worked on royal or temple projects. Then came the vast majority of Egyptians, farmers, or fellahin. These were the people who worked the land, growing the grain that fed the nation, tending the animals, and performing the back-breaking labor that sustained the economy. Farmers were not slaves, though their lives were hard and their obligations heavy. They owed taxes to the pharaoh, usually paid in produce, and could be conscripted for labor on royal projects, building pyramids, temples, or digging canals during the inundation season when farming was impossible. Soldiers formed another large group. Egypt had a standing army, and military service could be a path to advancement for those without other prospects. Successful soldiers could win land grants, booty from campaigns, and elevated social status. The army included Egyptian conscripts and, increasingly over time, foreign mercenaries. At the bottom of the social structure were servants and slaves, though the distinction between these categories was sometimes blurred. Most household servants were free people working for wages, though their status was low. True chattel slavery, where people were property that could be bought and sold, did exist in ancient Egypt, but it was less common than in some other ancient societies. Slaves might be prisoners of war, convicted criminals, or people who had sold themselves or their family members to pay debts. However, even slaves had some legal rights and could sometimes purchase their freedom. Women occupied an interesting position in this hierarchy. Unlike in many ancient societies, Egyptian women had substantial legal rights. They could own property independently, conduct business, initiate divorce, and testify in court. A woman's social status largely derived from her father's or husband's position, but she was not merely chattel. Elite women, especially those of royal blood, could wield considerable power. Several women served as pharaohs, most famously Hatshepsut and Cleopatra, though this was rare. It's important to understand that this social structure was not seen as unjust or oppressive by most ancient Egyptians. On the contrary, it was part of Ma'at, the divine order. Everyone had their place and their role, and performing that role properly was a religious and social duty. The king was meant to be a shepherd to his people, protecting and providing for them. In return, the people owed loyalty and labor. The gods had ordained this order, and humans were expected to maintain it. However, this doesn't mean the system was static. Talented individuals could rise, particularly through education. A farmer's son who learned to read and write and became a scribe could dramatically improve his family's circumstances. The path was narrow, but it existed. Conversely, noble families could fall from favor, losing their wealth and status through political intrigue, military defeat, or simply bad luck. The concept of status in ancient Egypt was also tied to purity and cleanliness. The elite distinguished themselves not just through wealth, but through elaborate grooming, fine linen clothing, and scented oils. Priests shaved their entire bodies and wore pure white linen because cleanliness was next to godliness. In contrast, farmers and laborers, toiling in the sun and mud, were often depicted in art as darker-skinned and more roughly dressed, not necessarily because of ethnicity, but as a marker of their outdoor labor and lower status. Understanding this social structure helps us understand daily life, because life was profoundly different depending on where you stood in this pyramid. A noble's day was filled with administrative duties, religious observances, and leisure. A farmer's day was filled with brutal physical labor. A scribe's day was spent with papyrus and ink, recording, calculating, and writing. A woman's day varied enormously depending on her status, from managing a large household estate to grinding grain and hauling water. As we explore specific aspects of daily life in the chapters ahead, this social context will always be present. We will see how people of different ranks ate different foods, lived in different houses, wore different clothes, and had vastly different opportunities and constraints. Yet we will also see the common threads, the shared experiences that united all Egyptians, living under the Egyptian sun, depending on the Nile's bounty, worshiping the same gods, and sharing a cultural identity that endured for millennia. Chapter 3. A Day Begins, Morning Routines Along the Nile. Let us now step into a specific day, into the lived experience of waking up in ancient Egypt. We will visit several homes, from the humble dwelling of a farmer to the grand estate of a noble, to understand how different Egyptians began their day. The day begins before dawn, as it often did in the ancient world. Without electric lights, people's schedules were governed by the sun. Going to bed soon after sunset and rising at or before dawn was natural when lamp oil was expensive and valuable. In a small village in the countryside, a farmer named Nacht awakens as the first pale light appears in the east. His home is modest, a small, rectangular structure made of mud bricks, with a flat roof of palm logs and reeds covered with mud. The walls are thick, providing insulation against the fierce daytime heat. The house has a few small rooms, a main living area, a smaller room where the family sleeps on reed mats, and a tiny space for storage. Nacht stirs on his sleeping mat. His wife, Mutamuya, is already awake, having risen even earlier. She has gone to the back of the house, where the cooking area is, essentially a simple hearth. The family sleeps lightly dressed or naked, covered with a light linen sheet, as the nights can be cool but rarely cold in most of Egypt. Noct rises and splashes water on his face from a ceralic jar near the door. Cleanliness was important to Egyptians of all classes, though the ability to maintain it varied. Noct has no elaborate bathing facilities, but he washes his face, hands, and feet most mornings. The water comes from the Nile, carried to the house yesterday by his eldest daughter in a clay pot balanced on her head. For clothing, Noct has little choice. He owns a simple kilt made of linen, a rectangular piece of cloth wrapped around the waist and tucked in to secure it. Linen was Egypt's primary textile, made from flax that grew abundantly in the Egyptian climate. Noct's kilt is coarse and undyed, practical wear for a working man. In the hottest months, he might work wearing even less, perhaps just a loincloth, or even naked, as modesty standards were different in ancient times and practical concerns about heat often took precedent. His wife, Mutamuya, wears a simple dress, a calasiris, which is essentially a tube of linen fabric that extends from just below her breasts to her ankles, held up by two straps over her shoulders. Like her husband's kilt, her dress is plain and practical. She goes barefoot, as do most Egyptians most of the time, though they might own simple sandals made of woven papyrus or palm leaves for special occasions or when walking on hot sand. Their children are stirring now. There are three, two daughters and a young son. The children sleep in the same small room as their parents. Privacy, as we understand it, did not exist for most people. The entire family lives, eats, sleeps, and works in close proximity. The children dress simply, the girls in small versions of their mother's dress, and the boy in a small kilt or simply a loincloth. Young children often wet naked, especially in the heat of summer. Breakfast for this farming family is simple. Mutamuya has prepared a basic meal of bread and beer, the staples of the Egyptian diet. The bread is made from emmer wheat or barley, ground on a stone saddle corn, a back-breaking task that falls to the women of the household. The bread is dense and often contains bits of stone from the grinding process, which wears down people's teeth over time, one of the common health problems of ancient Egypt. The beer is not quite like modern beer. It's a thick, nutritious beverage, made from partially baked bread that is crumbled into water and allowed to ferment. It has a low alcohol content and is consumed by everyone, including children, as it's safer than drinking Nile water directly and provides calories and nutrients. The family might also have some onions or dates, if available, to go with the bread and beer. They eat quickly, sitting on the ground or on simple stools made of wood or woven reeds. There is little conversation. The day's work is calling. Noct will head to the fields, which are not his own, but belong to a large estate, perhaps owned by a temple or a noble. He is a tenant farmer, working land that belongs to others and giving a portion of the harvest as rent and taxes. Before leaving, Noct takes a moment for a simple prayer. In a small niche in the wall of the main room, there is a small clay figure or image of a household god. Perhaps Bes, the dwarf god who protects families and children, or Teweret, the hippopotamus goddess who watches over pregnant women and mothers. Noct bows his head and murmurs a prayer, for a good day, for a good harvest, for protection for his family. Religion and daily life were inseparable in ancient Egypt. The gods were not distant beings, but ever-present forces that influenced every aspect of existence. As the sun breaks over the horizon, flooding the landscape with golden light, Noct picks up his hoe and heads toward the fields. The morning air is still relatively cool, a brief respite before the heat of the day begins. He walks along a path beside an irrigation canal, one of the many that channel Nile water to the fields. The system of basin irrigation developed by the Egyptians was sophisticated, allowing them to control the floodwaters and direct them where needed. Now let us visit a very different household on the other side of the social spectrum. In a villa in Thebes, the great city in Upper Egypt, a noble named Amenhotep is waking in very different circumstances. Amenhotep's house is substantial, a sprawling complex with many rooms around a central courtyard. The walls are made of mud brick, like the farmer's house, but these are plastered and painted with bright decorations, geometric patterns, images of gardens and pools, scenes from nature. The floors are of beaten earth or sometimes painted plaster. The roof is supported by wooden columns, and in some rooms, the ceiling is high to allow hot air to rise, keeping the living spaces cooler. Amenhotep sleeps not on a simple reed mat, but on a proper bed frame, with a woven mesh of leather or rope cords providing support. The bed is raised off the ground, protecting against scorpions and other creatures. The mattress is a thick linen pad filled with straw or feathers. He has several linen sheets, fine ones with high thread counts, woven by skilled craftsmen. Instead of a pillow like we use, Amenhotep has a wooden or ceramic headrest, a curved piece that supports the neck, keeping the head slightly elevated. This might seem uncomfortable to us, but it protected elaborate hairstyles and kept the head cool. Amenhotep wakes as a servant enters the room, quietly, bringing a basin of water for washing. The servant is a young man, one of several who work in the household. He bows respectfully and sets the basin on a stand, then withdraws silently. Amenhotep rises and washes thoroughly, using natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, as a kind of soap. The Egyptians valued cleanliness highly, associating it with purity and status. After washing, Amenhotep is attended by another servant who helps him dress. Wealthy Egyptian men wore kilts of much finer linen than Nocht's rough garment. The linen is so finely woven as to be almost transparent, requiring pleating and multiple layers. Amenhotep's kilt is elaborately pleated and draped, secured with a decorative belt. Over this, he might wear a light tunic or cloak for important occasions. But clothing is only the beginning of a wealthy Egyptian's grooming routine. Amenhotep pays great attention to his appearance, as befits his status. His body hair has been removed, either shaved or sometimes plucked. Smooth skin was considered attractive and civilized. His head is shaved as well, not for religious reasons like a priest, but for comfort and cleanliness. Instead of his own hair, Amenhotep wears a wig, an elaborate construction of human hair, sometimes supplemented with plant fibers, carefully styled and arranged. Wigs served multiple purposes. They were a status symbol, with more elaborate wigs indicating higher status. They protected the shaved scalp from the sun. They could be kept clean more easily than natural hair in a time before modern shampoo. And they were fashionable, allowing people to have perfect hair regardless of what nature had given them. Amenhotep's servant applies cosmetics, which were worn by both men and women in ancient Egypt. The most important is kohl, a black powder made from galena, ground lead sulfide, applied around the eyes to create the distinctive, heavily lined look we see in Egyptian art. This wasn't merely cosmetic. The kohl helped reduce glare from the intense Egyptian sun and may have had antibacterial properties that protected against eye infections, which were common in Egypt's dusty environment. Green eye paint made from malachite might also be applied. The lips might be colored with red ochre. Cheeks might be rouged. Various scented oils and creams are massaged into the skin, both for their pleasant fragrance and to protect against the drying effects of the sun and heat. The Egyptians made perfumes and scented unguents from many sources: lotus flowers, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, and many others. Amenhotep also adorns himself with jewelry. Wealthy Egyptians, male and female alike, wore substantial amounts of jewelry: necklaces, bracelets, armlets, anklets, and rings. These were made from gold, silver, and semi-precious stones like carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise. The jewelry served to display wealth and status, but also had amuletic properties, providing magical protection to the wearer. Finally dressed and groomed, Amenhotep is ready to break his fast. He proceeds to an open courtyard of his villa, where morning light streams in and a small garden provides a pleasant setting. Here, servants have set out a much more elaborate breakfast than Nocht's simple bread and beer. There is still bread, of course, but bread made from finer flour, lighter and more palatable. There are different kinds of beer and wine, for wealthy Egyptians consumed wine made from grapes, grown in the delta and other favorable areas. But there is much more: dates, figs, and dom palm fruits, small fish, dried or cooked, cheese made from goat or cow milk, honey, that precious sweetener, and various vegetables like lettuce, cucumbers, and onions. The food is served on ceramic or even metal plates, and Amenhotep eats using his hands, as cutlery as we know it didn't exist. However, servants provide water for washing hands before and after the meal, and table manners were observed. Amenhotep's wife, Mutemwiya, a different Mutemwiya than our farmer's wife, but sharing a common name, meaning Mut in the solar bark, joins him. She is similarly elaborately groomed, wearing a fine linen dress, more fitted and elaborate than a poor woman's tube dress, possibly pleated and with beading. She wears her own wig, styled differently than her husband's, and even more jewelry. Her eyes are lined with kohl, her lips reddened, her skin perfumed. They discuss the day's plans. Amenhotep, as an official in the government, will go to his office, likely in a temple complex or government building, where he oversees some aspect of administration, perhaps grain distribution or tax collection. His wife will manage the household, a complex operation involving multiple servants, food preparation, textile production, even wealthy households spun and wove linen, and oversight of the estate's agricultural operations if they owned land. Their children, if young, will be cared for by servants. If older, sons might accompany their father to learn his trade, while daughters stay with their mother, learning the skills of managing a household. If the family is ambitious and wealthy enough, the children, particularly the sons, might attend a school to learn reading and writing, the path to becoming a scribe and maintaining or elevating the family's status. These two scenes, the farmer's simple rising and the noble's elaborate morning routine, represent the extremes of Egyptian society. Most people fell somewhere between these poles: craftsmen who lived better than farmers but lacked a noble's wealth, merchants who might be prosperous but not aristocratic, soldiers who had steady work but hard lives, priests who had status but varied incomes. Yet, despite these differences, all Egyptians shared certain commonalities in how they started their day. All washed, to the extent their circumstances allowed, for cleanliness was valued. All ate breakfast, even if the menu varied enormously. All dressed in linen, even if the quality differed vastly. All prayed or acknowledged the gods, for religion permeated life. And all, from the mightiest noble to the humblest farmer, lived under the same Egyptian sun, beside the same Nile, participants in the same ancient civilization. Chapter 4: The Egyptian Home: Architecture and Living Spaces. To truly understand daily life in ancient Egypt, we must explore the spaces where that life unfolded, the homes where Egyptians lived, slept, cooked, raised their children, and spent their free time. Egyptian domestic architecture varied greatly depending on social class, but certain features and principles remained constant across the social spectrum. Let us begin with the materials and methods of construction. Egypt is a land rich in one building material: mud. The Nile's annual flooding deposited vast quantities of alluvial soil, which, when mixed with water and straw or chaff, could be formed into bricks. These mud bricks were shaped in wooden molds, then left to dry in the intense Egyptian sun, which baked them hard. Unlike the fired bricks of later civilizations, Egyptian mud bricks were sun-dried, making them cheaper and easier to produce, but also less durable, especially when exposed to water, which was rare in Egypt's arid climate. Stone, though plentiful in Egypt's cliffs and desert, was reserved almost exclusively for temples, tombs, and royal monuments, structures meant to last for eternity. Houses, even those of the wealthy, were built of mud brick, structures for the living that were understood to be temporary. This is why so much less is known about Egyptian domestic architecture than about temples and tombs. The houses have largely crumbled away over the millennia, while the stone monuments endured. For the poorest Egyptians, home might be little more than a simple rectangular structure, a single room or at most 2 or 3 rooms, with thick walls to provide insulation against heat. The floor would be packed earth, perhaps covered with reed mats. The roof was flat, made of palm logs laid across the walls and covered with reeds and a thick layer of mud. This roof was not merely a cover, but an additional living space. In the cool of the evening, families would sleep on the roof to escape the heat that lingered inside. The roof might also be used for storage of various items that needed to be kept dry. A typical farmer's house, like Nacht's house that we visited earlier, might have 3 or 4 rooms. The entrance would lead into a main living area, which served multiple purposes, receiving visitors, working at various crafts during leisure time, and general daily activities. Behind this would be a smaller room, or perhaps 2, for sleeping. At the back or side of the house would be a cooking area, sometimes open to the air or with just a simple roof, where smoke from the fire could escape without filling the house. Storage was a constant concern. Without refrigeration or modern preservation methods, keeping food safe from spoilage, rodents, and insects was challenging. Many houses had large ceramic jars, partially buried in the floor, for storing grain, the most important commodity. These jars might be sealed with mud or cloth to keep out mice and insects. Other foods might be kept in baskets or pottery vessels. Some houses had small cellars, essentially pits dug into the ground and lined with brick or simply left as earth, where the temperature was cooler and more constant. Furniture in a poor household was minimal. People sat on the floor, on simple reed mats, or on low stools made of 3 or 4 legs with a woven reed or leather seat. Beds were often just reed mats on the floor, though some families might have a simple platform of mud brick or wood, slightly elevated to avoid scorpions and snakes. Tables, if present at all, were low and small. Most possessions were kept in baskets or ceramic vessels. Lighting after dark came from simple oil lamps, small ceramic dishes with a spout to hold a wick, filled with oil, usually from the castor plant. These gave off a dim, smoky light. For most people, artificial light was a luxury, used sparingly, and activities requiring good light were done during daylight hours. Windows were small, high on the walls, serving more for ventilation than light. Glass was rare and expensive. Windows were simply openings, sometimes covered with woven reeds or matting that could be rolled up or down. The small size of windows helped keep the house cool by limiting the sun's direct entry while still allowing air circulation. Now let us ascend the social ladder and visit a more prosperous home. A successful craftsman, a minor official, or a moderately wealthy merchant might live in a house of perhaps 6 to 10 rooms, arranged around a central courtyard. This courtyard was key to Egyptian domestic architecture. It provided light and air to the surrounding rooms, created a private outdoor space for the family, and often contained a small garden. In this courtyard, there might be a small pool or basin, providing not only water for household use, but also evaporative cooling. The sound and sight of water were precious in the desert environment. Around the pool might be planted a few trees, date palms providing fruit and shade, sycamore figs, or even a small vine. Flowers might be grown, lotus and papyrus if water was sufficient, or flowering shrubs. The rooms around the courtyard were more specialized than in a poorer home. There would be a reception room for visitors, decorated with painted plaster walls showing scenes from nature or geometric patterns. The colors would be bright, reds and yellows from iron oxides, blues and greens from copper compounds, whites from gypsum and lime, blacks from soot and charcoal. These rooms might have small niches in the walls for lamps or small statues. Sleeping chambers would be more private, perhaps in an upper story, reached by stairs or a ladder. Egyptian houses could be 2 or even 3 stories tall, with each level set back from the one below, creating terraces. These upper rooms were cooler, catching breezes and being further from the heat radiating from the ground. A wealthier household would have more and better furniture. Beds might have actual frames of wood, with webbed supports of leather cords. Chairs, not just stools, would be present, some with backs and armrests made of wood and sometimes inlaid with ivory or precious woods. Chests for storing clothing and valuables would be crafted from wood, sometimes decorated with intricate inlay work or painted scenes. Low tables would be used for serving food and for games. The kitchen area would be more elaborate, perhaps a separate room with multiple hearths for different cooking tasks. There might be an oven for baking bread, a ceramic dome-shaped structure. Large ceramic storage jars for grain, oil, wine, and beer would line the walls. Vegetables and fruits might hang from the ceiling, drying for preservation. There would be numerous pots, pans, and cooking utensils. Wealthy households might also have a bathroom of sorts, a room with a stone slab floor, slightly sloped, where water could be poured for bathing, with the runoff channeled outside. Toilets were simple affairs, wooden or stone seats over a pot or pit with sand used to cover waste. Indoor plumbing as we know it did not exist, but the wealthy could approximate it with servants to bring water and remove waste. At the very top of the social hierarchy, the estates of nobles and high officials were compounds rather than single houses. These might cover substantial areas and include multiple buildings. The main house might have dozens of rooms, including specialized spaces like offices for administration, libraries for storing papyrus documents, and shrine rooms for religious observances. These estates would have extensive gardens, not just small courtyard plots, but significant green spaces with pools and even artificial lakes. Trees of various kinds provided fruit and shade: dates, figs, persacea, and pomegranates. Flower gardens were laid out in geometric patterns, with roses, jasmine, and lilies. Vines grew on trellises. These gardens were not merely decorative, they were statements of wealth and power, demonstrating control over nature in the desert environment. They were also spiritual spaces, representing the ordered, fertile paradise that Egyptians hoped to enjoy in the afterlife. The estate would include separate buildings for servants' quarters, granaries for storing the estate's agricultural produce, workshops where craftsmen produced goods for the household's use, and perhaps stables for cattle, donkeys, or horses in later periods. The whole complex might be surrounded by a wall, providing security and privacy. The interiors of wealthy homes were richly decorated. Walls were covered with painted plaster showing elaborate scenes: the owner hunting in the marshes, family members at a banquet, the beautiful garden surrounding the house, or religious scenes. Floors might be painted to resemble pools filled with fish and lotus flowers, or gardens. Columns supporting the roof might be carved and painted to resemble palm trees or papyrus bundles. Furniture in these homes was fine work. Beds and chairs were made from imported woods like cedar from Lebanon, inlaid with ebony, ivory, and gold. Chair legs might be carved to resemble animal legs, a common Egyptian motif. Cushions covered in fine linen or even imported fabrics provided comfort. Chests and cabinets, some with multiple drawers, stored clothing, jewelry, and valuables. Lighting in a wealthy home was still by oil lamp, but these lamps were finer objects, made of bronze or even gold, sometimes shaped like flowers or held by small carved figures. More lamps could be afforded, making evening activities easier. What is striking about Egyptian domestic architecture, across all social levels, is how well adapted it was to the environment. The thick mud brick walls provided excellent insulation, keeping interiors cool during the scorching days and retaining warmth during the cool nights. Flat roofs provided additional living space and a place to sleep during hot weather. Small, high windows limited direct sun but allowed air circulation. Courtyards brought light and air into the center of the house without exposing rooms to direct sun. The use of local materials, mud and reeds and calm logs, meant houses were affordable to build, even if they required constant maintenance. Yet houses were also adapted to social and religious requirements. The provision of a shrine or niche for household gods in even modest homes shows how religion permeated domestic life. The separation of public and private spaces, with reception rooms near the entrance and family areas deeper inside, reflected concepts of hospitality and privacy. The inclusion of gardens and pools in wealthier homes reflected not just a love of beauty, but the Egyptian concept of life as a struggle between order and chaos, with the cultivated garden representing order imposed on the chaos of the desert. Throughout a house's life, it would be maintained and modified. Rooms might be added as families grew. Walls would be replastered and repainted. Roofs would be repaired after damage from rare rains. When a house became unusable, it would simply be abandoned and a new house built nearby or on top of the old one, creating the tells, the mounded ancient sites that archaeologists excavate today. The Egyptian house was not just a shelter, but a microcosm of Egyptian life and values. It was where family life unfolded, where children were raised, where crafts were practiced, where the gods were honored, and where the rhythms of daily life played out, day after day, generation after generation, for thousands of years. Chapter 5. Daily Bread, Food and Drink in Ancient Egypt. Food and drink were central to daily life in ancient Egypt, as they are in all human societies. But what the Egyptians ate and drank was shaped by their unique environment, their agricultural practices, and their religious beliefs. Let us explore the Egyptian diet across social classes and understand what it meant to dine in this ancient civilization. At the foundation of the Egyptian diet were two staples, bread and beer. These were so central to life that they served as a form of currency. Workers were often paid in rations of bread and beer, and these items featured in every religious offering. The Egyptian word for food in general was essentially bread, showing how important this staple was. Bread was made primarily from emmer wheat, an ancient variety of wheat that was the predominant grain crop in early Egypt. Barley was also grown and used for bread, though it was considered somewhat inferior. The process of making bread was labor-intensive and fell primarily to women in most households, though there were also professional bakers, male and female, who produced bread on a larger scale. First, the grain had to be ground into flour. This was done using a saddle quern, two stones, one flat and one curved, between which grain was crushed by pushing the upper stone back and forth across the lower. This work required strength and constant repetition, and it left stone grit in the flour, which wore down people's teeth over the years, one of the most common health problems visible in ancient Egyptian skeletal remains. The flour was mixed with water to make dough, often with the addition of a little salt. Leavening was achieved through wild yeast in the air or by keeping back a portion of old dough to mix with the new. The dough was shaped and then baked, sometimes in molds, sometimes freeform, in ovens made of Nile clay, heated with burning wood or dried dung. Egyptian bread came in many varieties. The wealthy enjoyed fine white bread made from wheat flour that had been sieved to remove most of the grit and bran. The poor ate coarser bread, darker and heartier, with more grit and fiber. Bread could be shaped into various forms: round loaves, conical shapes, braided designs. Some breads were sweetened with honey or dates. Others might contain herbs or seeds. Bread was always eaten fresh, as it would quickly become hard in the dry climate, though stale bread was not wasted, but could be softened in water or used to make beer. Beer, as mentioned earlier, was the universal beverage. The Egyptian brewing process was unique. Bread was partially baked, then crumbled into a large jar with water. Sometimes dates were added for sweetness and additional fermentation. The mixture was allowed to ferment for a day or two, the sugars in the bread and dates converting to alcohol through the action of wild yeasts. The result was then strained through a basket, producing a thick, nutritious beverage that was more like a liquid food than modern beer. This beer was low in alcohol, usually around 2 to 3%, less than modern beers. It was nutritious, providing calories, vitamins, and minerals. It was also safer to drink than raw Nile water, which could carry disease. Everyone drank beer, from small children to the elderly, from farmers to pharaohs, though the quality varied. Fine beer for the wealthy was well filtered and smooth, while poor quality beer was cloudy and thick. Beyond bread and beer, the Egyptian diet included a variety of other foods, with considerable variation based on social class and season. Vegetables were important, and ancient Egypt grew many kinds. Onions and garlic were ubiquitous, eaten by everyone. Lettuce, which the Egyptians believed had aphrodisiac properties, was popular. Cucumbers, leeks, radishes, and various legumes like lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans were all cultivated and consumed. Fruits were a treat, especially for those who could afford them or grow them. Dates were the most common, growing abundantly on date palms. Figs from the sycamore fig tree were enjoyed. Grapes were grown, especially in the delta and oases, and were eaten fresh or dried as raisins. Pomegranates, melons, and watermelons also grew in Egypt. The fruit of the dom palm was chewed for its sweet, gingerbread-like flavor. Later in Egyptian history, as trade expanded, more exotic fruits became available to the wealthy. The Nile and its marshes provided fish in abundance, and fish were a major protein source for most Egyptians. Many varieties were caught: Nile perch, tilapia, catfish, and many others. Fish were eaten fresh, dried, or salted for preservation. They could be grilled, boiled, or fried in oil. Interestingly, some fish were considered sacred and were not eaten in certain regions, and priests were generally forbidden to eat fish, considering it spiritually impure. But for the common people, fish was everyday fare. Birds were also plentiful. Ducks, geese, quail, and other waterfowl were caught in the marshes using nets and traps. Wealthier Egyptians might keep domesticated ducks and geese. Bird eggs were gathered and eaten. Birds could be roasted, boiled, or preserved by drying or salting. Meat from larger animals was more of a luxury, especially for ordinary people. Cattle, both the long-horned native cattle and the humped zebu, were raised, but beef was expensive and typically reserved for the wealthy and for festival occasions. Sheep and goats were kept primarily for milk and wool, but older animals were slaughtered for meat. Pork was eaten, though it seems to have been viewed with some ambivalence. Like fish, pigs were considered by priests to be unclean and were not used in temple offerings. Nevertheless, pigs were raised and pork was consumed, especially by the lower classes. The wealthiest Egyptians feasted on exotic game, oryx and gazelle from the desert, wild bulls, and even lion on rare occasions. Hunting scenes in tomb paintings show nobles in the marshes hunting hippos and crocodiles, though how often these dangerous animals were actually consumed versus how often such scenes represented symbolic triumphs over chaos is debatable. Milk from cows and goats was available, though in the hot climate it spoiled quickly unless consumed immediately or processed. Cheese was made, a way of preserving milk, and was eaten by all classes. Butter was less common, but milk fat was used in cooking. Eggs from various birds were eaten, providing a good protein source. Honey was the primary sweetener, harvested from bees that were kept in cylindrical pottery hives. Honey was expensive, a luxury item, but it was used both as food and medicine and featured in many religious offerings. Oils and fats were important for cooking and flavoring. Sesame oil, linseed oil, and olive oil in later periods were used. These were expensive, so they were used sparingly by the poor, more liberally by the wealthy. Seasonings and herbs added flavor. Besides the ubiquitous onions and garlic, the Egyptians used coriander, cumin, and fenugreek. Salt from desert deposits and sea salt from the northern coasts provided essential minerals and preserved food. Dates and honey sweetened dishes. Vinegar, from fermented wine or beer, added tartness. Wine was the drink of the wealthy. Made from grapes grown in the delta, the oases of the western desert, and imported from Palestine and Syria, wine was expensive and associated with luxury and celebration. It came in various qualities, from rough tavern wine to fine vintages produced in royal vineyards. Wine was stored in large amphora, clay jars, sealed with mud or resin, and often labeled with the vintage, vineyard, and winemaker's name, showing a sophisticated wine culture. Preparing and serving food varied greatly by social class. In a poor household, Mutamaya, our farmer's wife, would do all the cooking herself, perhaps with help from her daughters. The cooking would be simple: bread baking, beer brewing, making a stew of lentils with onions and whatever vegetables were available, perhaps with a bit of dried fish for flavor. Meals would be basic and repetitive, nutritious, but not varied. In a wealthy household, food preparation was the work of multiple servants, working in a dedicated kitchen area. There might be a baker who did nothing but make various breads. A brewer would produce beer. Other servants would prepare more elaborate dishes: roasted meats, stewed vegetables with expensive spices, fish prepared in various ways, sweet pastries made with honey and nuts, fresh fruits arranged attractively. A feast at a noble's house, the kind depicted in tomb paintings, was an elaborate affair. Guests would arrive dressed in their finest, wearing wigs, jewelry, and their best linen. Servants would provide water for washing hands and anoint guests' heads with scented cones of fat mixed with perfume, which would slowly melt during the feast, releasing fragrance. The guests would sit on chairs or cushions, and servants would bring course after course: different breads, roasted ducks and geese, boiled or grilled fish, beef for the most important guests, stewed vegetables, salads of lettuce and cucumber, various condiments, fresh fruits for dessert, sweetmeats made with honey and dates. Beer and wine would flow freely. Musicians and dancers would entertain between courses. Conversation, poetry, and music would fill the air. Such feasts were not everyday occurrences, but special events, celebrations of religious festivals, family milestones, or simply displays of wealth and hospitality. But even for the wealthy, daily meals were simpler. The pattern was typically two main meals, a morning meal after rising and a larger evening meal when the day's work was done. In between, people might snack on bread, fruit, or vegetables. The evening meal was the social center of the day, when family members gathered, talked about the day's events, and shared food and companionship. Religious beliefs deeply influenced diet. Many foods were offered to the gods in temples, then redistributed to priests and temple workers. The concept of spiritual purity meant that priests observed dietary restrictions, avoiding fish and pork. Certain animals were considered sacred and could not be eaten. During religious festivals, special foods were prepared and consumed, often including items that were treats for ordinary people. Funerary beliefs also involved food. Tombs were stocked with provisions for the afterlife: bread, beer, meat, vegetables, and fruits, either real food that would desiccate in the dry tomb atmosphere, or representations of food in paintings or models. The living would bring food offerings to the tombs of their ancestors. This connection between food and eternity shows how central sustenance was to the Egyptian worldview. Malnutrition and famine were real threats. In years when the Nile flood was inadequate, harvests failed and hunger stalked the land. Even in good years, the poor lived on the edge of subsistence. The wealthy had stores of grain and could weather bad years, but the poor suffered. Tooth wear from gritty bread, signs of nutritional deficiencies, and parasites from contaminated food and water all show up in ancient remains, reminding us that for all its abundance, the Nile's gift could be precarious. Yet, on balance, Egypt was a land of plenty. The annual flooding ensured good harvests most years. The variety of foods, the surplus production that supported cities, temples, and armies, the development of a sophisticated food culture with different breads, beers, and wines all point to a society that not only survived but thrived on its dietary foundations. Food was not just fuel, but culture. Sharing bread and beer created social bonds. Feast scenes in tombs expressed hopes for eternal abundance. The daily act of breaking bread, whether the simple meal of a farmer or the elaborate banquet of a noble, was a fundamental human act that connected Egyptians across class divides and across the millennia to us, who still gather to share food and companionship. Food was not just fuel, but culture. Sharing bread and beer created social bonds. Feast scenes in tombs expressed hopes for eternal abundance. The daily act of breaking bread, whether the simple meal of a farmer or the elaborate banquet of a noble, was a fundamental human act that connected Egyptians across class divides and across the millennia to us, who still gather to share food and companionship. Chapter 6: Linen and Leather, Clothing and Personal Appearance. Unlike wool, which the Egyptians had but considered impure and unsuitable for temple wear, linen is light, breathable, and becomes softer with washing. It could be woven in various grades, from coarse cloth for work garments to fabric so fine it was nearly transparent, a luxury of the wealthy. The basic garment for men was the kilt or shendi. In its simplest form, this was just a rectangular piece of linen wrapped around the hips and tucked in to secure it, creating a skirt that reached from waist to knees. Working men and the poor wore simple versions of this, sometimes very short, sometimes just a loincloth. The fabric would be coarse, undyed linen. Wealthier men wore more elaborate kilts. The linen would be finer, sometimes nearly sheer. The kilt might be longer, reaching nearly to the ankles. Most distinctively, it might be pleated. Egyptian pleating was a sophisticated craft. The fabric would be starched with diluted plant gum, then carefully folded and pressed, possibly using heated stones, creating sharp, precise pleats that held their shape. These pleats could be arranged in various patterns: vertical, fan-shaped, or box pleats. Over the kilt, a man might wear a tunic or cloak for special occasions. These were simple garments, basically rectangles of linen with holes for the head and arms draped over the body. They might be left open at the sides or sewn. In later periods, the fashion became more elaborate, with fitted tunics and more complex draping. For women, the basic garment was the kalosseris or sheath dress. In its classic form, this was a tube of linen that extended from just below the breasts to the ankles, held up by two shoulder straps. This garment was fitted to the body, showing the figure. How these dresses were constructed is debated. They might have been sewn tubes that stretched over the body, or they might have been wrapped and tied in ways that created the appearance of a fitted dress. Like men's kilts, women's dresses came in various qualities. A poor woman wore a simple, unadorned dress of coarse linen. A wealthy woman's dress might be of the finest linen, pleated like men's formal kilts, sometimes with elaborate beadwork or embroidery. The pleating was particularly impressive on women's garments, with tiny, precise pleats that must have required enormous skill to create and maintain. In later periods of Egyptian history, fashion evolved. Women began wearing more elaborate garments, cloaks or shawls over the basic dress, wrapped and draped in various ways. Some dresses had sleeves. The Ptolemaic period, influenced by Greek culture, saw Egyptian women adopting more voluminous, draped garments. Color in Egyptian clothing is an interesting question. Most everyday garments were the natural color of linen, white, cream, or pale golden beige. White was associated with purity and was the preferred color for temple clothing. However, we know Egyptians could and did dye fabric. Red from madder root or ochre, blue from indigofera or woad, yellow from saffron or other plants, and green from various sources. All appear in textile fragments. But dyeing was expensive, so colored garments were luxury items, status symbols for the wealthy. Children's clothing was minimal, especially in the lower classes. Young children often went naked, a practical choice in the hot climate. When they did wear clothing, it was simple: a small kilt for boys, a short dress for girls. The distinctive side lock of youth, a hairstyle where the head was shaved except for one long lock of hair at the side, identified children regardless of what they wore. Footwear was simple and not always worn. Most Egyptians went barefoot most of the time, their feet toughened by constant contact with the ground. Sandals, when worn, were made from woven papyrus, palm leaves, or reeds. Wealthier individuals might have leather sandals. The design was basic, a sole with straps that went between the toes and around the ankle. Sandals were often removed before entering houses or sacred spaces, showing respect. They were valuable enough that people carried them and put them on only when needed. Now let us turn to what truly distinguished Egyptian appearance: grooming, cosmetics, and jewelry. The Egyptians were extraordinarily attentive to personal grooming, and this was true across social classes, though the materials and elaborateness varied. Cleanliness was paramount. Even poor Egyptians washed daily when possible, using water from the Nile. Wealthier Egyptians bathed multiple times a day, using not just water, but also natron, a naturally occurring salt compound. It worked somewhat like soap, cutting through oils and dirt. Some households had shower rooms where water was poured over the bather. After bathing, oils and creams were applied to protect the skin from sun and dryness. Hair removal was standard practice for both men and women, at least among those who could afford the time and tools. Razors made of bronze or copper were used to shave. Wealthy individuals might have servants do this. Body hair was removed from arms, legs, torso, and face. For men, being clean-shaven distinguished civilized Egyptians from foreign barbarians who wore beards. Priests were required to shave their entire bodies every few days as part of their ritual purity. But if Egyptians removed their natural hair, they replaced it with artificial hair, wigs. Wigs were worn by both sexes and were major fashion statements. They served practical purposes, protecting shaved heads from the sun and keeping heads cool, as air could circulate between the wig and scalp. But they were also beautiful objects, carefully crafted status symbols. Wigs were made from human hair, though plant fibers and sheep's wool were sometimes used for cheaper versions or to add bulk. The hair was cleaned, treated, and attached to a mesh base. The styling was elaborate: long straight hair, ringlets, tight curls, braids, all arranged in careful patterns. Wigs were often shoulder length or longer, sometimes extending down to the chest or even further. They were colored, usually maintaining natural black or dark brown, but sometimes hennaed to a reddish tone. Different styles were fashionable in different periods. The Old Kingdom favored shorter, neat wigs. The Middle Kingdom saw longer styles. The New Kingdom had elaborate, heavy wigs with intricate braiding and curling. Men's and women's wigs were styled differently, but were equally elaborate among the elite. Maintaining a wig required work. They had to be cleaned, oiled, and restyled. Wealthy households might have servants who specialized in wig care. Wigs were valuable possessions, sometimes left as bequests in wills. People often owned multiple wigs for different occasions, simpler ones for daily wear, elaborate ones for festivals and ceremonies. Cosmetics were used by both men and women in ancient Egypt more extensively than in most ancient cultures. The most important was eye makeup. Kohl, or mesdemet, was applied around the eyes in the distinctive style we see in Egyptian art. This wasn't just vanity. The dark powder helped reduce glare from the intense sun and may have had antibacterial properties that protected against eye infections. Kohl was made by grinding galena, lead sulfide, into a fine powder, mixed with oil or animal fat to create a paste. It was stored in small containers, often beautifully crafted, from stone, ceramic, or wood. It was applied with a small stick, carefully lining the eyes, extending the lines at the corners, and sometimes coloring the eyebrows. Green eye makeup, made from malachite, copper ore, was also used, sometimes applied to the eyelids or as an alternative to kohl. In the early periods, green was actually more common than black for eye makeup. Other cosmetics included lip color and cheek rouge made from red ochre mixed with oil or fat to create a paste. Henna was used to color nails, palms of hands, and soles of feet, a practice that continues in the region today. Various beauty marks and decorations might be applied for special occasions. Perfumes and scented oils were central to Egyptian grooming. The hot climate made body odor a concern, and pleasant scents were highly valued. Perfumes were made from many sources: flowers like lotus and jasmine, resins like myrrh and frankincense imported from the south, spices like cinnamon, and even animal products like musk. These were mixed with oils or fats to create scented unguents. These unguents served multiple purposes. They moisturized skin dried by sun and wind, they provided pleasant fragrance, and in the case of the famous perfume cones shown in banquet scenes, they were dramatic fashion statements. These cones, placed on top of wigs, were made of perfumed fat that would slowly melt during an event, releasing fragrance and dripping down over the wig and body. While we see these in art, whether they were actually worn or were symbolic representations is debated among scholars. Jewelry was perhaps the most visible marker of wealth and status in ancient Egypt. Egyptians loved jewelry and wore it abundantly. Even the poor wore simple beaded necklaces or amulets. The wealthy draped themselves in gold, silver, and precious stones. Necklaces ranged from simple strings of beads to elaborate broad collars, useks, that covered the shoulders and chest with multiple rows of beads, often in colorful patterns. Bracelets and armlets were worn on wrists and upper arms, sometimes multiple on each arm. Anklets adorned the legs. Rings were worn on fingers and sometimes toes. Earrings appeared in the New Kingdom, becoming quite popular. The materials and workmanship varied enormously. The poor wore jewelry of glazed ceramic beads, painted pottery, or carved bone. The middle classes might have copper or bronze jewelry, semi-precious stones like carnelian or turquoise. The wealthy wore gold, silver, electrum, a gold-silver alloy, and precious stones, lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, turquoise from Sinai, amethyst, and emeralds. Egyptian jewelers were master craftsmen. They could create delicate filigree work, granulation, tiny gold balls soldered onto a surface, inlay work combining different materials, and complex designs. Jewelry often had religious or protective significance. Amulets shaped like gods, sacred animals, or symbols like the Ankh, life, or Jed, stability, were worn for protection. Jewelry wasn't just decoration, it was spiritual armor. Certain items of jewelry were particularly associated with status. The gold collar of honor was a reward given by the pharaoh to loyal officials, shown in many tomb paintings. Royal jewelry included crowns, diadems, and spectacular pieces, like the treasures of Tutankhamun that show the incredible artistry of Egyptian jewelers. Personal appearance, then, was about much more than covering the body. It was about displaying status, showing civilization and purity, attracting the divine favor, and protecting oneself spiritually. The time and resources devoted to appearance, from the simplest farmer washing in the Nile to the elaborate toilette of a noble, show how important this aspect of daily life was. Getting dressed each morning, applying makeup, putting on jewelry, these weren't just routines, but rituals, ways of preparing oneself to face the day, to present oneself to society and to the gods. The care taken with appearance, the attention to detail, the artistic sensibility applied to personal adornment, all reflect the Egyptian love of beauty and order, their belief that how one appeared in the world mattered, both in this life and in the next. Chapter 7: The Work of Hands, Crafts, Trades, and Professions. Ancient Egyptian civilization rested not just on the agricultural labor of farmers, but on the skilled work of countless craftsmen and professionals. From the scribes who kept the records, to the potters who made the vessels, from the jewelers who created beauty, to the embalmers who prepared the dead. Egyptian society was a complex web of specialized occupations. Let us explore the world of work in ancient Egypt, understanding what people did and how they did it. At the center of the professional class stood the scribe. In a society where literacy was rare, perhaps only 1 to 5% of the population could read and write, scribes held enormous power. They were the administrators, record keepers, tax collectors, and officials who made the government function. Becoming a scribe required years of education, starting in childhood. Boys, and in rare cases girls, from families of some means, would attend schools, often attached to temples or government offices. The curriculum was rigorous and repetitive. Students learned to write using a reed brush on bits of pottery, broken limestone chips called ostraka, and eventually on papyrus once they showed sufficient skill. They learned hieroglyphs, the formal pictographic script used for monuments and religious texts. They learned hieratic, the cursive form of hieroglyphs used for everyday writing. They memorized thousands of signs and their meanings. They practiced by copying classic texts, wisdom literature, letters, and administrative documents. They learned arithmetic, essential for calculating taxes, measuring fields, and managing inventories. They studied geography, knowing the nomes and their resources. Some advanced students learned astronomy, medicine, or religious texts. The training was harsh. A famous text advises students, "The ear of a boy is on his back. He listens when he is beaten." Corporal punishment was standard educational practice, but the reward was worth it. A scribe could rise high in government, living in comfort, exempt from manual labor and military conscription. As one text put it, "There is no profession without a boss, except for the scribe. He is the boss." The scribe's tools were simple but essential. A wooden palette with hollows for red and black ink cakes, made from soot and ochre mixed with gum. A pot of water for wetting the reed brush. The brush itself, a slender reed with the end chewed to separate the fibers. Rolls of papyrus, made from the papyrus plant that grew abundantly in the delta marshes. Papyrus manufacture was itself a specialized craft. The papyrus stems were cut and the pith was sliced into thin strips. These strips were laid side by side, then another layer was laid crosswise on top. The strips were then beaten or pressed, the plant's natural sap binding them together. The result was smoothed and dried, creating a writing surface. Sheets could be glued together to form long rolls. The scribe would sit cross-legged, unrolling the papyrus across his kilted lap, writing in columns from right to left. Mistakes could be scraped off or washed away before the ink dried. Important documents would be sealed with clay stamps impressed with seals. Records were stored in jars or boxes, labeled for later retrieval. Let us move now to other crafts, starting with pottery. Every Egyptian household needed pottery, jars for storing grain, oil, water, and beer, bowls and plates for food, lamps for light, incense burners for rituals. Pottery was made by specialized craftsmen working in workshops. The potter's wheel had been introduced to Egypt by the Middle Kingdom and revolutionized pottery production. The wheel was a simple device, a flat disc rotated by hand or foot, but it allowed for much faster, more uniform production than hand building. The potter would take a lump of Nile clay, center it on the wheel, and with practiced skill, draw up the walls of a vessel, shaping it with fingers and simple tools. Once shaped, pots were dried and then fired in kilns. Egyptian potters developed sophisticated techniques. They could create thin-walled, delicate vessels or large, sturdy storage jars. They could burnish the surface to a smooth shine or leave it rough. Most pottery was unglazed, the natural red-brown color of Nile clay. But potters could apply slips, thin clay coatings in different colors. Decoration was added by painting, incising, or impressing patterns. Different workshops specialized in different wares. Some made fine tableware for the wealthy. Others produced common storage jars in large quantities. Still others specialized in ritual pottery for temples or funerary vessels for tombs. Pottery workshops might employ dozens of workers: clay preparers who processed the raw material, turners at the wheels, decorators, and kiln operators. Woodworking was another essential craft. While Egypt had few native trees suitable for large-scale woodwork, mainly date palms and acacias, they imported cedar from Lebanon, ebony from Africa, and other woods through trade. Carpenters created furniture: beds, chairs, stools, chests, and tables. They made coffins, from simple rectangular boxes for the poor to elaborate anthropoid, human-shaped coffins for the wealthy. They built boats, everything from small papyrus skiffs to large wooden ships. The carpenter's tools would be familiar to us in principle, if not in detail. Saws, both straight and curved, made of copper and later bronze, with teeth cut into the metal. Adzes, L-shaped tools for shaping wood. Chisels for carving. Mallets for striking chisels. Bow drills for making holes, worked by pulling a cord back and forth to spin the drill bit. Measuring tools, plumb bobs, squares, and leveling instruments. Glue made from animal hides and bones joined pieces together. Wooden pegs served as nails. Fine furniture was elaborately decorated. Inlay work using ivory, ebony, and other precious woods created intricate patterns. Legs might be carved to resemble animal legs, a common motif. Surfaces might be painted with scenes or covered with gold leaf. The furniture found in Tutankhamun's tomb shows the incredible artistry of Egyptian carpenters. Stoneworkers formed another crucial craft group. Masons quarried and shaped the stone for temples, tombs, and monuments. Quarrying was brutal work. Workers would identify a likely stone block, then cut channels around it using harder stone pounders made of dolerite. Wooden wedges were driven into cracks and then soaked with water. As the wood expanded, it split the stone. The block was then shaped with copper or bronze chisels, the surface smoothed with stone rubbers and sand. Moving these massive blocks was an engineering feat. They were dragged on sledges, workers pulling ropes, while others poured water in front to reduce friction. Ramps of mud brick and rubble allowed blocks to be raised. The precision with which blocks were fitted together in pyramids and temples, sometimes without mortar, shows master craftsmanship. Sculptors worked stone into statues of gods, kings, and nobles. They worked from established conventions, using grids to maintain proper proportions. The stone was rough-shaped with chisels and hammers, then finely finished with abrasives. Surface details were carved with delicate precision. Finally, the statue might be painted, for Egyptian stone sculpture was originally brightly colored, though millennia of exposure have left most unpainted. Metalworkers were highly valued craftsmen. Copper, mined in Sinai and the Eastern Desert, was the first metal widely used. It was later alloyed with tin to create bronze, much harder and more durable. Gold, panned from the desert or mined, was plentiful enough in Egypt to make it a major gold-producing region of the ancient world. Silver, rarer in Egypt than gold, was imported and highly valued. Metalworkers used several techniques. Casting involved melting metal and pouring it into molds made of stone or clay. Once cooled, the piece was removed and finished. Sheet metal was created by hammering ingots into thin sheets, which could then be cut, shaped, and decorated. Repoussé work involved hammering from the back to create raised designs on the front. Engraving added fine details. Soldering joined pieces together. Jewelry makers were specialized metalworkers, creating the spectacular adornments we see in museums. They could create incredibly delicate work, filigree designs of twisted wires thinner than hairs, granulation with tiny spheres of gold, cloisonne with compartments filled with colored glass or stone. They set precious stones, carved beads, and created clasps and chains. The technical skill was matched by artistic sensibility, creating pieces that were both beautiful and meaningful, often incorporating religious symbolism. Textile workers, primarily women, were essential to the economy. Every household needed linen for clothing, bedding, and more. While households produced their own textiles, there were also large workshops, especially attached to temples, where dozens of women worked spinning and weaving. Spinning was the first step, turning flax fibers into thread. This was done with a simple spindle, a stick weighted with a whirl. The spinner drew out fibers from a bundle of prepared flax, attached them to the spindle, and set it spinning. As it spun, it twisted the fibers into thread, which accumulated on the spindle. This required constant attention and considerable skill to create even, strong thread. Weaving turned thread into fabric on looms. Early Egyptian looms were horizontal, pegged to the ground, with the weaver sitting to work. Later, vertical looms appeared, which could create longer pieces of cloth. The weaver passed the weft thread back and forth through the warp threads, creating fabric. Fine linen required very fine thread and tight weaving, work that demanded patience and skill. The finest linen was called royal linen, or woven air, for its transparency and delicacy. Creating such fabric took enormous time and skill, making it a luxury available only to the elite. Coarser linen for everyday use was produced more quickly, but still required considerable labor. Leather workers created sandals, bags, straps, and various other items from animal hides. The hides had to be cleaned, often by soaking and scraping, then tanned using various substances like salt, alum, or plant tannins to preserve them. The leather could then be cut, shaped, and sewn. Basket weavers created containers of all kinds, from reeds, palm leaves, and grasses. Baskets served many purposes, storing food, carrying goods, even serving as coffins for the poor. The weaving techniques were sophisticated, creating tight, waterproof baskets or loose, flexible ones as needed. Bakers and brewers, though we've discussed bread and beer before, deserve mention as professional craftsmen. Large households, temples, and palaces employed bakers who did nothing but produce bread in its many varieties. Brewers specialized in making beer, sometimes flavoring it with dates, honey, or spices. These were not simple tasks, but skilled crafts requiring knowledge and experience. Embalmers practiced perhaps the most unusual profession. When a person died, especially a wealthy one, the body would be taken to the embalmers for mummification. This process, designed to preserve the body for eternity, was complex and ritualistic. The embalmers worked in workshops, often located on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the dead, where the sun set. The body was first washed and purified. Then, the brain was removed through the nose using hooks, the cranium packed with linen or resin. The internal organs, except the heart, were removed through an incision in the side, washed and stored in canopic jars. The heart, considered the seat of intelligence and emotion, was left in place. The body was then covered in natron, the same salt used for cleaning, which drew out moisture. After about 40 days, the body was washed again, then stuffed with linen, sawdust, or other materials to restore shape. Resin might be poured into the body cavity. The skin was rubbed with oils and unguents. Finally, the body was wrapped in many layers of linen bandages, with amulets placed between layers for protection, and the whole process accompanied by prayers and rituals. This work required anatomical knowledge, chemical understanding, ritual knowledge, and physical stamina, as it involved handling decomposing bodies. Embalmers were respected professionals, though their work brought them into contact with death, which the Egyptians viewed with ambivalence. Physicians were another professional class, some of the earliest specialized medical practitioners in history. Egyptian medicine combined practical knowledge with magical and religious healing. Physicians could set broken bones, stitch wounds, prescribe medicines made from plants and minerals, and perform some surgeries. Specialization existed even within medicine. There were eye doctors, dentists, doctors for internal ailments, and surgeons. They learned from apprenticeship and from medical texts written on papyrus, which documented symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. The Ebers Papyrus and Edwin Smith Papyrus, surviving medical texts, show a surprisingly rational approach to medicine, though always intertwined with prayers and spells. Teachers, though we've mentioned scribal schools, also formed a profession. Some scribes specialized in teaching, running schools, or working as private tutors for wealthy families. They taught not just writing and arithmetic, but also wisdom literature, ethics, and sometimes specialized knowledge like temple rituals or astronomical calculations. Musicians and dancers were professional entertainers, though their status varied. Temple musicians, who performed for the gods, had high status. Professional mourners, women hired to weep and wail at funerals, were common but low status. Dancers and acrobats entertained at feasts and festivals. All of these crafts and professions shared certain features. Most were learned through apprenticeship, sons learning from fathers or students from masters. Knowledge was passed orally and through demonstration, with guilds or workshops acting as informal schools. Most craftsmen worked in shops, either independent businesses or attached to large estates or temples. They were paid in rations of bread and beer, plus some combination of other goods or, eventually, in later periods, in metal weights that served as proto-currency. Pride in craftsmanship was evident. The best work was signed or could be attributed to specific workshops. Master craftsmen were respected members of society, somewhere in the middle ranks, above farmers but below officials. They lived modestly but securely, their specialized skills providing a reliable living. The economy of work in ancient Egypt was not a free market as we understand it. Most craftsmen worked directly for the state, either for the royal administration or for temples, which were essentially state institutions. They received rations rather than wages. They produced goods for redistribution rather than for sale. But within this system, there was some scope for private work. A carpenter might do government work, but also take commissions from individuals. A jeweler might create pieces for his own sale at markets. The organization of work was often communal. Workshops might have dozens of workers laboring side by side. The construction of monuments involved corvée labor, conscripted workers from the provinces fulfilling their tax obligations through months of labor. These workers were organized into crews with names and identities, fostering solidarity and competition between groups. Through all this work, whether the delicate work of a jeweler or the brutal labor of a stone hauler, ran threads of meaning. Work was not just survival, but contribution to Ma'at, the cosmic order. Building a temple was serving the gods. Creating a coffin was helping someone achieve eternal life. Even the humblest work had dignity as part of the functioning of Egyptian civilization, a civilization that rested not on the backs of faceless masses, but on the skilled hands and strong backs of countless individuals, each performing their role in the great dance of Egyptian life. Chapter 8: Learning and Wisdom, Education and Knowledge in Ancient Egypt. Knowledge in ancient Egypt was power, and access to knowledge determined one's place in society. In a world where literacy was rare, those who could read and write held the keys to administration, religion, and upward mobility. Let us explore how knowledge was acquired and transmitted in this ancient civilization, what was considered worth knowing, and how education shaped Egyptian society. Egyptian education was not universal. There were no public schools in our modern sense, no expectation that every child would learn to read and write. Instead, education was a privilege, mainly accessible to boys from families of means, though not exclusively the wealthy. The sons of scribes, officials, and prosperous craftsmen might attend school. So might bright boys from humbler backgrounds if they caught the eye of a patron who saw promise in them. Education began early, usually around age 4 or 5, though formal schooling might start at 7 or 8. The goal for most students was to become literate, to master the complex Egyptian writing system sufficiently to work as scribes in the vast bureaucracy. Schools were often attached to temples or government offices, places where scribes worked and where students could see the practical application of their studies. Classes were held in open courtyards or dedicated rooms. Students sat cross-legged on the ground, writing boards across their laps or at low tables. The teacher, himself a scribe, was an authority figure to be feared and respected. Discipline was strict, physical punishment common. The famous Middle Kingdom text, Satire of the Trades, has a father tell his son being sent to school, "I have seen the beating. You should set your heart on books." But this harshness was believed necessary to instill the discipline required for the difficult task of mastering Egyptian literacy. The Egyptian writing system was extraordinarily complex. There were actually three scripts: hieroglyphic, hieratic, and later demotic. Hieroglyphs, the sacred carved letters, were the formal script, consisting of hundreds of pictographic signs representing objects, sounds, and ideas. These were used for monuments, temples, and sacred texts, carved in stone or carefully painted. But hieroglyphs were too time-consuming for everyday use. So scribes developed hieratic, a cursive version of hieroglyphs, much faster to write with a reed brush on papyrus. The signs were simplified and flowing, connected for speed. A scribe needed to recognize both scripts, read hieroglyphs, and write hieratic fluently. The challenge was that Egyptian writing didn't use an alphabet of 26 letters like English. Instead, there were hundreds of signs. Some were phonetic, representing sounds, uniliterals representing single sounds, biliterals representing two sound combinations, and triliterals representing three sounds. Others were logograms, signs that represented whole words or concepts. Still others were determinatives, signs that didn't represent sounds but clarified the meaning of phonetic spellings. To make matters more complex, Egyptian writing typically didn't indicate vowels, only consonants. So the same string of consonants might be several different words, distinguished only by determinatives or context. Reading required not just recognizing signs, but understanding grammar and context. Students learned through repetition and memorization. They began with simple signs, practicing writing them over and over on ostraca, broken pottery shards, which were cheap and plentiful. Papyrus was too valuable to waste on beginners' mistakes. They would write the same sign hundreds of times until their hand learned its shape. As they progressed, they copied increasingly complex texts. Classic wisdom literature, like the instructions of Ptahhotep or the maxims of Ani, were standard texts. These teachings conveyed not just literacy, but ethical and social values, respect for superiors, proper behavior, the importance of self-control, the value of wisdom. Students memorized these texts, internalizing the values of Egyptian society along with its script. Letters were another standard teaching tool. Students copied model letters, learning the conventional forms of address, the polite phrases, the proper style for different types of correspondence. They learned to write official documents, tax receipts, inventory lists, legal contracts. The practical nature of their education was always evident. They were learning to be working scribes, not scholars for their own sake. Mathematics was a crucial part of scribal education. The administration of Egypt required constant calculation, measuring fields to assess taxes, calculating grain yields, managing rations, measuring volumes, calculating the labor needed for construction projects. Egyptian mathematics was practical, focused on solving real-world problems rather than abstract theory. Egyptians used a decimal system, but wrote numbers with special hieroglyphs: a stroke for 1, a hobble for 10, a coil of rope for 100, a lotus flower for 1,000, and so on up to 1,000,000. They could add and subtract straightforwardly. Multiplication and division were more complex, done through repeated doubling and adding. Fractions were particularly interesting. Egyptians generally used unit fractions, fractions with 1 as the numerator, like 1/2, 1/3, 1/5. More complex fractions were expressed as sums of different unit fractions. The fraction 2/3 was used as a special case, and the fractions associated with the eye of Horus, parts of the eye representing fractions from 1/2 to 1/64, were used for measuring grain. Students learned to calculate areas of rectangles, triangles, and circles, and the volumes of cylinders and pyramids. They learned practical problems. If a field is this size and yields this much grain, what is the tax owed? If we need to feed this many workers for this many days, how much grain do we need? Mathematical papyri, like the Rind mathematical papyrus, show the kinds of problems students tackled. Geography was another important subject. Students learned the nomes of Egypt, their names, their capitals, their local gods, and their economic products. They learned about foreign lands, at least those Egypt had contact with, Nubia to the south, Libya to the west, the Sinai and Levant to the northeast. This knowledge was essential for administrators who might be posted anywhere in Egypt or for scribes managing trade and tribute from foreign lands. For students who progressed further, more specialized education was available. Potential priests learned religious texts, the hymns to gods, the ritual instructions for temple services, the spells and incantations of magic. These were transmitted orally and in writing, often in archaic language that had to be carefully learned. Medical students learned from medical papyri and from experienced physicians. They studied anatomy, learning to identify symptoms and match them to treatments documented in medical texts. They learned recipes for medicines, which plants, minerals, or animal substances to use, in what proportions, prepared how. They learned spells and incantations that accompanied medical treatments, for Egyptian medicine was always part practical science, part religious ritual. Architects and engineers learned principles of construction, measurement, and design. Some of this knowledge was practical, learned on the job, but there were also written texts on surveying, calculating proportions, and engineering principles. The precision of Egyptian monuments suggests sophisticated mathematical and engineering knowledge. Astronomers learned to track the movements of stars and planets. Egyptian astronomy was primarily practical, used for creating calendars and timing religious festivals. Priests watched the heliacal rising of certain stars, the pre-dawn appearance of a star after a period of invisibility to predict the Nile flood and mark the new year. They tracked the moon's phases for lunar calendars. The ceiling of the Dendera temple complex shows sophisticated astronomical knowledge, mapping constellations and planetary movements. But beyond these practical subjects, Egyptian education also transmitted wisdom. Wisdom literature, instructions on how to live a good life, was central to the curriculum. These texts, often framed as a father's advice to his son or a king's instructions to his heir, taught proper conduct, respect for authority, the importance of ma'at, and practical ethics for navigating society. Be a craftsman in speech, one text advises, for the power of a man is in his tongue. Another teaches, do not talk a lot, be silent, and you will be happy. The emphasis was on self-control, knowing when to speak and when to be silent, respecting superiors, and treating inferiors with appropriate kindness. This was not abstract philosophy, but practical ethics for surviving and thriving in a hierarchical society. Women's education was different and more limited. Most girls did not attend formal schools. They learned from their mothers the skills they would need, managing a household, spinning and weaving, preparing food, raising children. For upper-class girls, this education could be quite sophisticated, teaching them to manage large estates with many servants, to entertain guests properly, and to comport themselves as befitting their status. However, some women did become literate. We have evidence of female scribes, though they were rare. Some priestesses could read religious texts. Royal women were often educated, as they might need to rule as regents or even as pharaohs. The famous Queen Hatshepsut was certainly literate and knowledgeable, as evidenced by her successful rule and the inscriptions she left. For most children, education was not formal schooling, but apprenticeship. Farmers' sons learned farming by working alongside their fathers from early childhood. Craftsmen's sons learned their father's trade in the same way. Girls learned women's work from their mothers and other female relatives. This on-the-job training was effective, passing down practical skills generation after generation. Yet, even without formal education, ordinary Egyptians were not ignorant. They knew their local geography, the rhythms of the agricultural year, the names and stories of gods, and basic counting sufficient for daily transactions. They memorized songs, stories, proverbs, and traditions passed down orally. While they couldn't read the texts written on temple walls, priests would read and explain religious texts during festivals. The famous Tale of Sinuhe or the story of the shipwrecked sailor were known stories, recited and enjoyed even by those who couldn't read them. Libraries existed, though they were institutional rather than public. Temples had houses of life, scriptoria, where sacred texts were copied, stored, and studied. These were combination libraries, schools, and research centers, where priests studied religious texts, astronomical observations, and medical knowledge. The most famous was at Alexandria in the Ptolemaic period, but earlier temple libraries were significant repositories of knowledge. The survival of knowledge depended on continual copying. Papyrus, while durable in Egypt's dry climate, would eventually decay. Important texts had to be regularly copied to preserve them. This work kept scribes busy and ensured that knowledge passed from generation to generation. However, it also meant that knowledge could be lost if a text was not copied, or could be altered if a scribe made mistakes or intentional changes. Egyptian education was conservative, emphasizing mastery of established knowledge rather than innovation. Students learned what previous generations had learned in the same way, using the same texts. This conservatism contributed to the remarkable stability of Egyptian culture, but it also meant that knowledge advanced slowly. New ideas had to be framed in terms of ancient wisdom, rather than presented as innovations. Yet innovation did occur. New medical treatments were recorded, new hymns and religious texts were composed, new architectural techniques were developed. The Egyptian worldview was not static, even if it presented itself as eternal and unchanging. The goal of education was not to create questioning intellectuals, but competent professionals who could maintain and serve the system. A successful scribe was one who could efficiently administer, accurately record, properly serve his superiors, and eventually train the next generation. Knowledge was a tool for serving Ma'at, for maintaining the order of Egyptian civilization, not for questioning or changing that order. And yet, within this conservative framework, there was room for wisdom, for philosophical reflection, for literature that explored human emotions and ethical dilemmas. The dispute between a man and his ba contemplates suicide and the meaning of life. Love poetry expresses deep personal emotions. The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant is a sophisticated meditation on justice and rhetoric. Egyptian literature and thought were not shallow or simplistic, even if they operated within a framework that valued order and tradition over radical innovation. Education and knowledge in ancient Egypt were thus complex and multifaceted. They were tools of power and social mobility, means of maintaining civilization and cultural continuity, vehicles for transmitting not just practical skills, but values and wisdom. In a society where most people were illiterate, knowledge separated the elite from the masses, but that knowledge was not hoarded. It was used to serve society, to administer the state, to honor the gods, and to maintain the cosmic order upon which all Egyptian life depended. Chapter 9. At the Temple. Religion in Daily Life. Religion was not a separate sphere of life in ancient Egypt. It permeated everything. The gods were ever present, involved in every aspect of existence, from the rising of the sun to the flooding of the Nile, from the birth of a child to the final journey into the afterlife. To understand daily life in ancient Egypt, we must understand how religion shaped that life, how ordinary people experienced and expressed their beliefs, and how the sacred and mundane intertwined in the Egyptian worldview. The Egyptian pantheon was vast and complex, with hundreds of deities. Some were worshipped throughout Egypt, while others were local gods of specific towns or regions. Gods had complex relationships, sometimes merging into composite deities, sometimes appearing in different forms or aspects. This was not monotheism, but henotheism, where one might focus on a particular god while accepting that other gods existed and were powerful. Among the great national gods was Ra, or Re, the sun god, creator of all. He sailed across the sky each day in his solar bark and through the underworld each night, struggling against the chaos serpent Apophis. His daily journey symbolized the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, the triumph of order over chaos. Pharaohs were considered sons of Ra, emphasizing their divine nature. Osiris was the god of the dead and resurrection. According to myth, Osiris was a king murdered by his jealous brother Set, dismembered and scattered. His devoted wife Isis gathered the pieces and resurrected him long enough to conceive their son Horus. Osiris then became ruler of the underworld, judge of the dead. Every deceased Egyptian hoped to become an Osiris, to be resurrected and live eternally as Osiris had. Isis herself was one of the most beloved goddesses, the archetypal mother and wife, powerful in magic. Horus, her son, was the sky god, the living pharaoh's divine counterpart. Set, despite being Osiris's murderer, was also worshipped as the god of storms, chaos, and foreign lands, necessary chaos balanced against order. Ptah was the creator god of Memphis, who created the world through thought and speech, making him patron of craftsmen. Thoth, the ibis-headed god, was the god of wisdom, writing, and the moon, patron of scribes. Hathor, often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow's horns, was goddess of love, music, joy, and motherhood. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, presided over mummification and protected the dead. These and hundreds of other gods had complex mythologies, iconographies, and roles. But how did ordinary Egyptians, busy with their daily lives, interact with these divine beings? The great temples were the houses of the gods, literally. Each temple was dedicated to a particular deity, and the cult statue in the inner sanctuary was believed to be the god's physical presence on earth. But these temples were not like modern churches or mosques, where ordinary worshippers gathered for communal services. Instead, they were sacred precincts, the domain of priests who served the gods on behalf of society. A temple like Karnak, the great temple of Amun-Ra at Thebes, was a vast complex surrounded by high walls. Ordinary people could not enter the inner areas. The temple consisted of a series of courts and halls, becoming increasingly sacred and restricted as one moved inward. At the center was the sanctuary, a small, dark room housing the cult statue, accessible only to the highest priests and the pharaoh. The temple's daily ritual was performed not by congregations, but by priests on behalf of all Egypt. Each morning, the high priest would enter the sanctuary, break the seal on the shrine door, and awaken the god statue. The statue would be washed, anointed with oils, dressed in fresh linen, and offered food and drink. These offerings were elaborate: bread, beer, meat, vegetables, fruits, incense, all presented on offering tables. After the god had spiritually consumed the essence of these offerings, they were distributed to the priests as payment for their services, a practical system that supported the priestly class. Throughout the day, additional rituals, hymns, and offerings were performed. In the evening, the god was put to rest, the shrine sealed until morning. This daily service maintained ma'at, keeping the god content and ensuring the god's continued benevolent presence and protection. But if ordinary people couldn't enter the temple's sacred spaces, how did they participate in religion? Several ways. First, during festivals, the god statue would be brought out in procession, carried in a sacred bark, on the shoulders of priests. These processions followed set routes through the town, and crowds would gather to see the god pass, to make requests, to seek oracles. Oracle consultations were common. A question would be posed to the god statue during a procession. The priests carrying the bark would move forward or backward, interpreted as the god's yes or no answer. More complex questions might receive answers through lot casting or through priests interpreting signs. People consulted oracles about all manner of concerns: legal disputes, business decisions, accusations of theft, matters of personal importance. Festivals were major events in the Egyptian calendar, celebrated with public participation. The Apet festival at Thebes saw the god Amun's statue journey from Karnak to Luxor Temple and back, a journey of several miles that took weeks, with celebrations, offerings, distributions of food and drink, music, and dancing. The beautiful Festival of the Valley involved processions to the necropolis on the West Bank, where families visited ancestors' tombs, leaving offerings and spending the night feasting and celebrating. These festivals broke the routine of daily life, providing entertainment, communal experiences, and connection with the divine. They also had practical benefits. Rations were distributed, justice was dispensed, the pharaoh's power was displayed, and social bonds were reinforced. Beyond the great temples, ordinary Egyptians practiced more personal, intimate forms of religion. In their homes, they maintained small shrines, niches in walls, or simple altars, where they placed images or figurines of gods. Bes, the dwarf god who was fierce and protective, guarded homes and children. Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, protected pregnant women. Hathor, in her maternal aspect, watched over families. Small offerings were made at these household shrines: flowers, incense, simple food, prayers for protection and prosperity. Amulets were worn constantly, magical objects that provided divine protection. These might be simple beads inscribed with protective spells or elaborate pendants shaped like gods or sacred symbols. The Ankh symbolized life, the Jed represented stability, the Waz scepter meant power, the Wedjut, or Eye of Horus, provided protection. Scarab beetles, representing transformation and rebirth, were popular amulets. These were not mere decorations, but vital spiritual armor, protecting against disease, evil spirits, accidents, and misfortune. Magic and religion were inseparable in Egyptian thought. Spells and incantations were prayers backed by divine power. Medical treatments were accompanied by spells. Childbirth involved multiple protective spells and amulets. People hired magician priests to cast spells for love, prosperity, protection, or to curse enemies. Magic was Heka, a neutral force that could be used for good or ill, a power that existed from creation and could be accessed through proper knowledge and ritual. Personal piety, direct emotional connection with gods, is visible in prayers and votive offerings left at temples. People left small statues or stelae inscribed with prayers. These prayers were remarkably human. A woman asks Hathor for a child. A man thanks Amun for recovery from illness. Another asks Thoth for success in a scribal career. A person confesses sins and begs for forgiveness. These texts show that behind the formal state religion was genuine personal faith, people turning to gods in times of need, fear, hope, and gratitude. Dreams were considered messages from gods. Dream interpretation was practiced, and there were even dream books, papyri listing common dreams and their meanings. A good dream was an omen of divine favor. A bad dream required protective rituals to avert the threatened disaster. The afterlife obsessed the Egyptians, and beliefs about death shaped daily life. Egyptians believed in a complex soul: the Ka, a spiritual double; the Ba, personality or soul that could move freely; the Ak, the transfigured, effective spirit; the Name, identity; and the shadow. Death was not the end, but a transformation, a journey to the afterlife where, if one passed various tests and dangers, one could live eternally in the field of reeds, a paradise like the best of earthly Egypt. Preparing for death began during life. Those who could afford it commissioned tombs, had coffins made, accumulated funerary goods. The funeral was an important ritual. The body was mummified, as we've discussed. The funeral procession carried the mummy to the tomb, accompanied by professional mourners wailing and tearing their hair, priests reciting spells, and family carrying offerings. At the tomb, the crucial opening of the mouth ceremony was performed, ritual actions with special tools that symbolically restored the mummy's senses, allowing the deceased to breathe, eat, see, and hear in the afterlife. The mummy was placed in its coffin. The tomb was stocked with offerings and funerary goods, food, drink, furniture, clothes, shabtis, small figurines that would magically come to life to perform labor for the deceased in the afterlife, and sealed. The judgment of the soul was a central belief. The deceased's heart, seat of intellect and memory, was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and justice. Thoth recorded a result, while Ammit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waited to consume those who failed. Those whose hearts balanced with the feather were deemed true of voice and proceeded to eternal life. This belief in judgment encouraged ethical behavior in life. One's deeds mattered, as they would be judged after death. Yet religion was not all solemn. Festivals were celebrations, with drinking, dancing, music, and joy. Some religious festivals involved sexual imagery or activities, celebrating fertility and life force. The boundary between sacred and profane was not rigid. Life itself was sacred, and celebrating life with joy was a form of worship. Egyptians also recognized forces of chaos and evil. Iskat, the opposite of Ma'at, was disorder, chaos, injustice. It threatened constantly to overwhelm creation. Demons and evil spirits lurked, causing illness and misfortune. Snakes and scorpions were dangerous both physically and spiritually. The dead, if not properly cared for, could become restless and harmful. Much of religious practice was apotropaic, warding off evil, protecting against chaos, maintaining and reinforcing ma'at. Different people experienced religion differently based on their position. The pharaoh was himself divine, performing rituals that only he could, maintaining ma'at on the cosmic scale. High priests were powerful figures, guardians of sacred knowledge, performers of essential rituals. Lower-ranking priests served shifts in temples, living partly as temple servants, partly as normal citizens. Ordinary farmers prayed at household shrines and participated in festivals, but spent most time simply trying to survive, trusting that the pharaoh and priests were maintaining cosmic order on their behalf. Women's religious roles were significant. Women could be priestesses, though their roles differed from male priests. The chantresses of Hathor or Isis performed music and dance in temples. God's wives, high-ranking priestesses, held considerable power and wealth, especially in later periods. Women participated in festivals, made offerings, practiced magic, and prayed, equal to men in their access to personal piety, if not always to institutional roles. Over Egypt's long history, religious practices evolved. The Amarna period saw Akhenaten's attempt to establish Aten, the sun disk, as the sole god, rejecting the traditional pantheon. This radical experiment failed, and after Akhenaten's death, traditional religion was restored with vigor. In the Ptolemaic period, Greek influence brought new syncretic deities like Serapis, blending Egyptian and Greek religious concepts. But through all these changes, certain core beliefs endured: the divine nature of kingship, the importance of ma'at, the reality of an afterlife, the power of gods to influence daily life, and the necessity of ritual to maintain cosmic and social order. Religion was the framework within which all life made sense, the story that explained why the Nile flooded, why people died, why society was structured as it was, and what the ultimate purpose of existence might be. For an ancient Egyptian, to live without the gods was literally unthinkable. They were everywhere, in the sun rising each morning, in the crops growing, in children being born, in justice being done, in the hope of eternal life. Religion was not something done on certain days in certain places, but the very fabric of existence, woven into every moment of daily life along the Nile. Chapter 10: Healing and Wholeness, Medicine and Health in Ancient Egypt. Health and illness were central concerns in ancient Egyptian daily life, as in all human societies. Disease, injury, childbirth, and aging were facts of life that everyone faced. The Egyptians developed a sophisticated medical tradition, blending careful observation and practical treatments with magical and religious approaches. Let us explore how the Egyptians understood the body, what ailments they suffered, and how they sought healing. Egyptian medicine was among the most advanced in the ancient world, and Egyptian physicians were renowned throughout the Mediterranean. When Persian King Darius needed medical care, he summoned Egyptian physicians. Greek writers like Herodotus praised Egyptian medical knowledge. This reputation was well-deserved, based on millennia of accumulated experience, careful observation, and documented treatments. The Egyptians understood the body with surprising sophistication for their time. Through mummification, they had extensive practical knowledge of anatomy. They knew about the heart, lungs, liver, spleen, kidneys, brain, stomach, and intestines. They recognized that the heart was central to life, beating and circulating something throughout the body. While they didn't understand circulation as we do, they recognized that pulse was significant and that vessels, metu, connected the heart to all body parts, carrying air, blood, and other fluids. They recognized many diseases and conditions. Medical papyri like the Ebers Papyrus and Edwin Smith Papyrus catalog hundreds of ailments with diagnoses and treatments. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, likely a surgical text copied from older sources, is remarkably rational, describing cases systematically. Instructions concerning body part. If you examine a man having symptoms, you should say concerning him, one having diagnosis, then treatment. The text describes 48 cases, mostly injuries, wounds to the head, fractures of bones, dislocations, cuts, abscesses, and tumors. The approach is empirical and practical. Some cases are declared treatable, others uncertain, and some frankly described as an ailment not to be treated, acknowledging medical limitations. For treatable conditions, the papyrus provides detailed instructions. For a broken nose, you should press his nose into shape, then pack the interior of his nose with linen plugs. You should have him rest on sitting until the swelling has subsided. For a dislocated jaw, you should place your thumbs upon the ends of the two branches of the mandible inside his mouth and place your fingers under his chin and cause them to fall back so that they rest in their places. These treatments show solid anatomical knowledge and practical experience. Egyptian physicians could set broken bones, creating splints from wood and linen bandages. They could stitch wounds using needle and linen thread. They could drain abscesses. They performed circumcision, routinely depicted in tomb reliefs. They may have performed other surgeries, though evidence is limited. Egyptian pharmacology was extensive. The Ebers Papyrus lists over 800 remedies made from hundreds of substances, plants, minerals, and animal products. Willow bark, which contains salicylic acid, the basis of aspirin, was used for pain. Honey, which has antibacterial properties, was applied to wounds. Moldy bread, possibly containing primitive antibiotics, treated infections. Garlic, which has antiseptic properties, was used extensively. Other treatments are harder to evaluate. Various plants, minerals like copper or natron, and animal products like crocodile dung were prescribed. Some were probably effective, others inert placebos, some potentially harmful. The Egyptians learned through trial and error, and successful treatments were recorded and passed down, though they lacked the scientific framework to understand why treatments worked or didn't. Treatments took various forms. Oral medicines were made into pills, mixtures to drink, or foods to eat. External applications included poultices, plasters, ointments, and salves. Fumigations involved burning substances and inhaling or being exposed to the smoke. Suppositories and enemas were used for internal conditions. Bandages might be applied dry or soaked in medicinal substances. Alongside physical treatments, medical practice always included magical and religious elements. Spells and incantations accompanied almost every treatment. The physician might recite, "Flow out pain, come out evil. I have made the protection for this patient, protecting him from his enemies. Thoth is his protection, possessing spells effective against them." The spell was not superstitious nonsense, but essential. Medicine worked on both physical and spiritual levels. Amulets might be prescribed as part of treatment. A pregnant woman would wear amulets of Bes and Taweret for protection. A sick person might wear an amulet inscribed with healing spells. The boundary between physical medicine and magical protection was non-existent. Both addressed the same problem of illness from different angles. Physicians often had priestly training or worked alongside priests. Some physicians specialized in particular areas, an early form of medical specialization. There were dentists, eye doctors, specialists in internal conditions, and general practitioners. Women could practice medicine. There are references to female physicians, though they were rare. Training came through apprenticeship. A young physician learned from an experienced one, starting with simple tasks, observing treatments, learning to recognize symptoms, and memorizing medical texts. Medical texts were carefully copied and preserved in houses of life, temple libraries where sacred and medical texts were studied and strong. Yet diagnosis was not always sophisticated. Many ailments were attributed to disease demons, evil spirits that entered the body. Some conditions were blamed on the dead, restless spirits causing trouble. The cause might be divine anger, requiring propitiation. The physician had to diagnose both the physical ailment and its spiritual cause, prescribing treatments and rituals accordingly. Common health problems in ancient Egypt are well documented through skeletal remains, mummies, and medical texts. Dental issues were endemic. The grit from stone-ground grain wore teeth down to the roots, causing abscesses and infections. Many mummies show severe dental disease, which must have caused chronic pain. Tooth extraction was possible but risky. Dental fillings using various materials have been found, showing attempts to preserve damaged teeth. Eye diseases were common in the dusty, bright environment. Trachoma, a bacterial infection, could cause blindness. Conjunctivitis and other eye infections were frequent. This explains the emphasis on eye cosmetics, which may have provided some protection, and the presence of eye doctors as specialists. Medical texts describe treatments for various eye conditions, though their effectiveness is uncertain. Parasites plagued Egyptians. Schistosomiasis, caused by parasitic worms in the Nile, infected large portions of the population. The parasites enter through the skin during contact with water, then migrate to blood vessels, causing chronic illness. Guinea worm, another parasite from contaminated water, was common. Intestinal parasites from undercooked food were widespread. These parasites caused chronic illness, weakness, and shortened lives. Malaria was present, though perhaps less common than in some regions. Tuberculosis affected some Egyptians. Smallpox may have existed. Ramesses V's mummy shows what might be smallpox scars. Polio is documented. A stele shows a priest with a withered leg, characteristic of polio. Various fevers, respiratory infections, and digestive ailments afflicted people, as they do everywhere. Childbirth was dangerous for both mother and child. Many women died in childbirth. Many infants didn't survive their first year. Medical texts provide spells and treatments to ease childbirth, prevent miscarriage, and protect newborns. Pessaries, vaginal suppositories, were used to treat conditions or prevent conception. Midwives assisted births. Wet nurses nursed infants whose mothers died or couldn't nurse. Contraception and abortion were known. Various recipes for contraceptive pessaries exist, using substances like crocodile dung, honey, and natron. Efficacy is doubtful for most, though some substances might have had spermicidal properties. Abortion was possible, though the ethical and legal status is unclear. Life expectancy was short by modern standards. Infant mortality was high. Perhaps a third of children died before age 5. Those who survived childhood might live into their 50s or 60s, but many died younger from disease, accident, or complications of childbirth. The elderly were respected, and living to old age was considered a divine blessing, but old age brought its own problems: arthritis, weakened vision, loss of teeth, general decline. Yet, despite these health challenges, many Egyptians lived full lives. The dry climate was actually healthier than many ancient environments, with fewer disease vectors than in wetter regions. The diet, though sometimes limited, was generally nutritious. Hard work kept people physically active. Social structures provided some support for the sick and elderly. The elderly were respected, and living to old age was considered a divine blessing, but old age brought its own problems: arthritis, weakened vision, loss of teeth, general decline. Yet, despite these health challenges, many Egyptians lived full lives. The dry climate was actually healthier than many ancient environments, with fewer disease vectors than in wetter regions. The diet, though sometimes limited, was generally nutritious. Hard work kept people physically active. Social structures provided some support for the sick and elderly. The Egyptian approach to health was holistic, in a way modern medicine is only now appreciating. They treated the whole person: physical body, spiritual condition, and social context. A physician didn't just prescribe medicine, but might recommend offerings to gods, wearing protective amulets, avoiding certain foods, or making social amends if illness was attributed to wrongdoing. Hygiene was valued. Cleanliness was associated with health and purity. Bathing, washing hands before eating, shaving body hair, and wearing clean linen were all health practices as well as social ones. Physicians emphasized cleanliness in treating wounds and preparing medicines. Preventive care existed in rudimentary form. Amulets protected against disease before it occurred. Dietary recommendations promoted health. Certain foods were considered healthful. Garlic boosted strength. Dates provided energy. Milk nourished. Moderation was advised in diet and drink. Mental health was recognized, though not in modern terms. Texts refer to people with wandering heart or disturbed minds. Treatments combined medicine with magic. The line between physical and mental illness wasn't drawn as sharply as we draw it. All illness had spiritual components. The Egyptian medical legacy influenced later medicine. Greek physicians learned from Egyptian texts and teachers. Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, may have been influenced by Egyptian approaches. The rational observational method of the Edwin Smith papyrus anticipates scientific medicine. The encyclopedic cataloging of treatments in the Ebers papyrus established a tradition of medical literature. For the individual Egyptian, illness was a crisis invoking all resources, calling physicians, performing rituals, making offerings to gods, seeking magical protection, and relying on family care. Recovery was attributed to divine favor as much as medical skill. Death, when it came, was not an end but a transition, and proper burial and funerary practices ensured that even in death one could find healing and wholeness in the afterlife. The Egyptian approach to healing and health, combining practical observation with spiritual understanding, may seem strange to modern eyes. But it reflected a worldview where physical and spiritual, natural and supernatural, were inseparably linked, where healing required addressing all aspects of a person's being, and where health was not just absence of disease, but harmony with the cosmic order, ma'at, that sustained all life. Chapter 11: The Marketplace, Commerce and Economy in Daily Life. The Egyptian economy was fundamentally different from modern capitalist systems, yet trade and commerce were vital parts of daily life. Let us explore how Egyptians bought and sold, what they valued, and how economic activity shaped their world. Ancient Egypt, for most of its history, did not use coined money. Coinage was invented elsewhere and only arrived in Egypt during the late period. Before that, the economy operated through barter, payment in kind, and a system of value equivalences that allowed different goods to be compared and exchanged. The foundation of the economy was agriculture. Egypt's fertile soil produced abundant grain, primarily emmer wheat and barley. This grain surplus was the wealth that supported everything else, feeding the population, paying workers, supporting priests and officials, funding building projects, and trading for goods Egypt lacked. The pharaoh theoretically owned all land, though in practice, land was held by temples, granted to officials and nobles as rewards, and worked by farmers who had hereditary rights to farm particular plots. The farmer's obligation was to pay taxes, usually calculated as a portion of the harvest. Tax collection was a major administrative operation. Scribes measured fields after the inundation subsided, calculated expected yields based on flood height and field quality, and assessed taxes accordingly. During harvest, officials supervised collection. Grain was stored in massive granaries, mud brick structures that could hold thousands of bushels. These granaries were Egypt's banks, storing wealth in the form of food. From these granaries, rations were distributed. Workers on royal or temple projects received daily rations, so much bread, so much beer, periodically supplemented with other foods. Officials received larger rations appropriate to their rank. Priests received shares of temple offerings. This redistribution system was how most people received compensation for their work. But this centralized system coexisted with more informal exchange. People traded goods and services with each other. A fisherman might trade fish for pottery. A weaver might exchange linen for grain. A carpenter might make furniture in return for beer and bread. These exchanges were often between neighbors or family members, based on personal relationships and rough notions of fairness. To facilitate these exchanges, the Egyptians developed a system of value equivalences. The basic unit of value was the deben, originally a weight of copper, about 91 grams, but functioning more as an abstract accounting unit. Goods could be valued in debens. A goat might be worth 1 deben, a fine linen garment 3 debens, a bull 20 debens. In transactions, goods would be valued in debens, allowing dissimilar items to be compared and exchanged fairly. Another unit was the shot, a smaller division, with 12 shot to 1 deben. Transactions might be recorded. I gave you a goat worth 1 deben, you gave me 2 shot in copper, 1 shot in barley, and 9 shot worth of linen. The actual items exchanged might not include any copper. Deben was just the accounting unit. Silver eventually became a preferred measure of value, as it was rarer than copper and thus more suitable for larger transactions. Gold was rarer still and was used for very large transactions or was controlled by the palace for royal purposes. Markets existed where people gathered to trade. These were not purpose-built structures with shops, but open areas where people brought goods to exchange. A marketplace in a town might be a square or a wide spot along a street. Sellers would spread mats and display their goods: vegetables, fish, bread, pottery, linen, tools, ornaments. Transactions involved haggling. A buyer would examine goods carefully, checking quality. The seller would name a price in terms of value equivalence. The buyer would offer less. Negotiations would ensue, sometimes animated, until agreement was reached or one party walked away. Payment might be in multiple goods to make up the agreed value. Some people specialized in trade. Merchants acquired goods from producers and sold them for profit. This was risky. Goods might spoil, be stolen, or fail to find buyers. But successful merchants could become wealthy. They traveled between towns, sometimes even abroad, bringing back foreign goods. Egypt's foreign trade was significant. Egypt had abundant grain and gold, but lacked certain resources. Timber, especially quality wood like cedar, came from Lebanon. Copper came from Sinai and Cyprus. Tin, needed to make bronze, came from distant sources, possibly Afghanistan or Anatolia. Incense, myrrh, and frankincense came from Punt, somewhere in modern Somalia or southern Arabia. Lapis lazuli, a precious blue stone, came from Afghanistan. Ivory and ebony came from Nubia and deeper Africa. Silver came from Anatolia and the Levant. Egyptian exports included grain, gold, papyrus, for which Egypt had a near monopoly, linen, renowned for its quality, and manufactured goods like jewelry, furniture, and stone vessels. This trade was often royal or temple-administered rather than private. Official expeditions, sometimes military-backed, traveled to obtain resources. Treaties with foreign powers included trade provisions. The workers' village at Deir el-Medina provides detailed evidence of economic life. This community of tomb builders for the Valley of the Kings kept extensive records on ostraca. We can see workers being paid rations, trading with each other, hiring services, and occasionally going on strike when rations weren't delivered on time, showing that even in a state-controlled economy, workers could assert themselves. Property could be bought and sold. Land transactions are documented, with fields sold for specific amounts valued in silver or grain. Houses could be sold. Even tomb sites could be purchased. These transactions were recorded by scribes, sometimes with witnesses, creating a legal record. Debt and credit existed. Someone might borrow grain with the understanding that it would be repaid with interest after harvest. Failure to repay could lead to loss of property or even debt bondage, where the debtor or family members worked for the creditor until the debt was cleared. However, debt bondage was not permanent slavery, and conditions were regulated. Women participated actively in economic life. They could own property, conduct business, buy and sell, and keep their own wealth separate from their husbands. Evidence shows women involved in trade, managing estates, and even serving as witnesses in transactions. Taxation was the state's main economic tool. Besides agricultural taxes, there were labor taxes. During Akhet, the inundation season, when fields were flooded and farm work impossible, able-bodied men could be conscripted for corvée labor, building pyramids, temples, canals, or quarrying stone. This was a tax paid in labor rather than goods. Corruption existed. Officials who controlled grain distribution could skim off the top. Tax collectors could demand more than owed, pocketing the difference. Tomb robbery, despite harsh punishments, was endemic, driven by the wealth buried with the dead. Court records document trials of corrupt officials and tomb robbers, showing the state struggled to control these economic crimes. Guilds or professional organizations may have existed, though evidence is limited. Workers in the same trade often lived in the same neighborhoods, suggesting organization. Craftsmen working on royal projects were organized into work gangs with clear hierarchies and identities. Prices fluctuated with supply and demand. After a good harvest, grain was cheap and other goods relatively expensive. After a poor harvest, grain prices soared. Evidence from Deir el-Medina shows prices of various goods changing over time, responding to availability. Wealth inequality was stark. The elite lived in luxury with vast resources. Officials received large grants of land. High priests controlled temple wealth. Meanwhile, ordinary farmers lived close to subsistence, one bad harvest away from hunger. This inequality was accepted as part of the natural order, ordained by the gods and reflected in the cosmic hierarchy. Yet, the system provided some security. The redistribution system meant that as long as the state functioned, people received rations. Granaries stored surplus against famine. The wealthy were expected to show charity. Tomb autobiographies often mention feeding the hungry and helping the needy, suggesting this was a social expectation, if not always a reality. The economy was embedded in social relationships more than in impersonal markets. Exchanges often occurred between people who knew each other, in contexts of ongoing relationships. Reputation mattered. A person known to cheat in deals would find it hard to trade. Honesty was not just ethical, but economically rational. Economic activity was also intertwined with religion. Temples were major economic institutions, owning vast lands, employing thousands, producing goods, and redistributing resources. Offerings to gods were economic transactions, giving goods to the temple with the understanding that divine favor would return greater benefits. Festivals involved massive redistribution of temple resources to participants. The Egyptian economy was remarkably stable over centuries, its rhythms tied to the agricultural cycle. This stability was part of what made Egyptian civilization endure so long. People knew their economic roles and responsibilities. The system, while hierarchical and unequal, provided most people with subsistence most of the time. Yet, there were also periods of economic crises. When inundations failed, famine ensued. During periods of weak central authority, the redistribution system broke down, causing hardship. Foreign invasions disrupted trade and agriculture. These crises show the system's vulnerabilities. For the individual Egyptian, economic life meant daily calculations. The farmer calculated whether to store grain or trade it, balancing future needs against present wants. The craftsman calculated how much to charge for his work, considering materials, time, and market conditions. The merchant calculated risks and potential profits. The housewife calculated how to stretch rations and manage household resources. These calculations were not done in abstract economic terms, but in terms of concrete needs and relationships. How much grain do we need to survive until next harvest? Can I trade some for a new tool I need? Should I help my neighbor now, trusting he'll help me later? Can I afford an offering at the temple? The marketplace, both literal and figurative, was where different aspects of Egyptian life intersected. Economic necessity met social obligation. Individual self-interest negotiated with community expectations. The state's redistribution system interacted with informal exchange networks. Material needs connected with religious duties through offerings and temple economics. The Egyptian economy was remarkably stable over centuries, its rhythms tied to the agricultural cycle. This stability was part of what made Egyptian civilization endure so long. People knew their economic roles and responsibilities. The system, while hierarchical and unequal, provided most people with subsistence most of the time. Yet, there were also periods of economic crises. When inundations failed, famine ensued. During periods of weak central authority, the redistribution system broke down, causing hardship. Foreign invasions disrupted trade and agriculture. These crises show the system's vulnerabilities. For the individual Egyptian, economic life meant daily calculations. The farmer calculated whether to store grain or trade it, balancing future needs against present wants. The craftsman calculated how much to charge for his work, considering materials, time, and market conditions. The merchant calculated risks and potential profits. The housewife calculated how to stretch rations and manage household resources. These calculations were not done in abstract economic terms, but in terms of concrete needs and relationships. How much grain do we need to survive until next harvest? Can I trade some for a new tool I need? Should I help my neighbor now, trusting he'll help me later? Can I afford an offering at the temple? The marketplace, both literal and figurative, was where different aspects of Egyptian life intersected. Economic necessity met social obligation. Individual self-interest negotiated with community expectations. The state's redistribution system interacted with informal exchange networks. Material needs connected with religious duties through offerings and temple economics. Commerce and economy in ancient Egypt were thus not separate from daily life, but deeply embedded in it. The grain tax and the marketplace transaction, the ration distribution and the craftsman's workshop, the merchant's journey and the temple's wealth, all were threads in the complex tapestry of Egyptian economic life, a system that sustained one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. Justice and order were not abstract concepts in ancient Egypt, but living realities that affected daily life. The Egyptians believed profoundly in Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order. Upholding Ma'at was not just the pharaoh's responsibility, but everyone's. Let us explore how law and justice worked in ancient Egyptian society, and how governance touched the lives of ordinary people. Egypt had no comprehensive written law code like Hammurabi's code in Mesopotamia. Instead, Egyptian law was based on custom, precedent, royal decrees, and the principle of Ma'at itself. Judges were expected to decide cases based on fairness and tradition, guided by Ma'at rather than by a rigid legal code. The pharaoh was the ultimate source of law and justice. He was the supreme judge, though in practice he delegated most judicial authority. Royal decrees could establish new laws or modify existing ones. The king's word was literally law. Appeals in the most serious or contentious cases could theoretically go to the pharaoh himself. Below the pharaoh, the vizier served as the chief judge, overseeing the judicial system. The vizier heard cases, particularly those involving high officials or complex legal questions. A famous Middle Kingdom text, The Installation of the Vizier, describes the vizier's judicial duties, sitting in judgment, hearing petitions, ensuring justice for all, regardless of status. Regional and local officials also served as judges. Nomarchs, governors of provinces, judged cases in their regions. Town mayors and village headmen judged minor local disputes. Temples had their own judicial systems for internal matters and sometimes judged cases involving temple property or personnel. Courts existed at various levels. Local councils of elders, respected men from the community, judged minor civil disputes. Higher courts, presided over by royal officials, judged more serious matters. Specialized courts might handle specific types of cases, such as property disputes or religious offenses. Trials were oral proceedings. The parties would present their cases, sometimes with witnesses. Written documents, if relevant, would be read. Oaths were often required, sworn before gods, making perjury a religious as well as legal offense. The judge or judges would question the parties and witnesses, then render a verdict. Evidence could include witness testimony, documents, and sometimes physical evidence. Written contracts, property deeds, and receipts were important legal documents. Witnesses might testify to seeing events, hearing statements, or knowing about circumstances. In some cases, oracles, questions posed to gods during temple processions, might be consulted, the god's answer serving as divine judgment. Punishments varied with the crime. For minor offenses, fines paid in goods or labor might suffice. Beatings with sticks were common for many offenses. Texts often specify 100 blows or similar as punishment. More serious crimes brought harsher penalties. Mutilation, cutting off nose, ears, or hands, was used for some offenses. Exile or forced labor were other options. The death penalty existed for the most serious crimes: murder, major theft, treason, tomb robbery, or certain religious offenses. Execution methods included impalement, burning, drowning, or beheading. Some texts suggest that execution could be carried out against not just the criminal, but also his family, particularly for treason, the logic being that the whole family was corrupted. However, how often this collective punishment was actually carried out is debated. Interestingly, some serious criminals could be given the option of suicide, considered more honorable than execution. The criminal would be handed a poison or weapon and allowed to end his own life, sparing the family some disgrace. Prisons existed, but imprisonment was not a common punishment in itself. Prisons were mainly holding facilities where people awaited trial or punishment, not punishment themselves. Debtor's bondage, working to repay a debt, was a form of controlled servitude rather than imprisonment. Legal documents were important. Contracts existed for many transactions: land sales, loans, marriage agreements, employment contracts, and more. These were written by scribes, often with witnesses present, creating a legal record. Temple and government archives stored important documents. Marriage in Egypt was largely a private matter rather than a state or religious ceremony. A couple would agree to live together as husband and wife, possibly with a marriage contract specifying property arrangements. The woman retained her own property, and if the marriage dissolved, she kept what she brought to it, plus a share of what was acquired during the marriage. This gave women considerable economic independence and protection. Divorce was possible for either party. A man could divorce his wife, but he had to return her property and possibly pay compensation. A woman could also initiate divorce, particularly if the husband was abusive or failed to provide. Children usually stayed with the mother after divorce. The relative ease of divorce and women's economic rights gave Egyptian women more independence than in many ancient societies. Children were legitimate whether born to married couples or not. Illegitimacy as a legal handicap didn't really exist. What mattered was that a father acknowledged a child as his, not whether the parents were formally married. This created flexible family structures. Inheritance followed clear rules. Property was divided among children, both sons and daughters, though sons might receive more. The eldest son often received a larger share or specific high-value items. Wives had rights to property, and a widow might have life use of her husband's estate, with it passing to children upon her death. Wills could be made, sometimes inscribed on stelae, specifying how property should be divided. Adoption was practiced, often to ensure someone would perform funerary rites and maintain the tomb. Childless couples might adopt, or an elderly person without children might adopt someone to care for them in old age and in death. Property rights were strong. Land, houses, and personal property were owned and could be bought, sold, or inherited. Boundary disputes were common legal cases, with surveyors and old records consulted to determine proper boundaries. Theft was a serious offense, and recovering stolen property could involve legal proceedings. Contracts often involved penalties for breach. A loan contract might specify that failure to repay by a certain date would result in doubling the amount owed, or seizure of property. Employment contracts might specify payment and penalties if the work wasn't completed. Legal records from Deir el-Medina provide fascinating details. One case involved a man accused of stealing tools. Witnesses were called, the accused denied it, but was found guilty and punished. Another case involved a property dispute between neighbors over a wall's location. A woman sued for divorce because her husband had abandoned her. These records show a functioning legal system dealing with everyday disputes. Women had significant legal rights, unusually so for the ancient world. They could testify in court as witnesses, they could bring lawsuits, they could make contracts independently. In one recorded case, a woman sued her husband's family for property she claimed was hers. These legal rights gave women agency and protection. Slaves, by contrast, had limited legal rights, though they were not entirely without protection. They could own property, marry, and their masters couldn't arbitrarily kill them. A slave who was mistreated might appeal to authorities, though how effectively this worked is unclear. Corruption and injustice existed despite the ideals. Officials could be bribed. The wealthy and powerful could influence outcomes. The poor might find justice elusive if facing wealthy opponents. Texts sometimes complain about corrupt judges who favor the rich, showing awareness of the gap between ideal and reality. Yet, there was also accountability. Officials could be prosecuted for abuse of power. High-ranking officials have been found guilty and punished for corruption. The famous tomb robbery trials of the Ramesside period show even high officials being investigated and punished for complicity in robbing royal tombs. Collective responsibility existed in some contexts. A village might be collectively responsible for crimes committed in its territory if the criminal wasn't found. This encouraged communities to police themselves and cooperate in crime prevention. Ordeals might be used when evidence was unclear. A suspect might be required to swear an oath before a god, with the understanding that divine punishment would follow perjury. In some cases, a physical ordeal might be required, though evidence for this in Egypt is limited compared to some cultures. Religious offenses were prosecuted. Desecrating a temple, stealing from a god, or violating religious purity rules could bring punishment. Priests had authority over religious law within temples. Blasphemy or witchcraft, if used harmfully, could be prosecuted. The harem conspiracy under Ramesses III shows the legal system dealing with treason. Members of the royal harem, along with officials and military officers, conspired to kill the pharaoh and place a prince on the throne. The plot was discovered, trials were held, recorded in surviving papyri. The guilty were executed or forced to commit suicide. The thoroughness of these trials, even for a plot against the king, shows that even in such serious cases, some legal process was followed. Governance at the local level involved officials appointed by the pharaoh, though some positions might be hereditary in practice. The nomarch governed the nome, collecting taxes, organizing corvée labor, maintaining irrigation, administering justice, and representing royal authority. Below him were various officials: town mayors, village headmen, scribes, tax collectors, police. Police existed, though organized differently than modern police. The Magi, originally a Nubian people, became a police force, patrolling deserts, protecting tombs and caravans, and maintaining order. Town guards watched at night, preventing crime. Police could arrest suspects, but they served judicial officials rather than functioning as an independent force. Village headmen were often the first level of governance people encountered. These were local men, usually respected elders or descendants of previous headmen, who mediated disputes, organized community projects, and relayed government orders to the village. Taxation, discussed in economic terms earlier, was also governance. The state's reach into daily life was felt most directly through tax collection. Scribes, appearing after harvest to measure fields and collect grain, were the face of government for most farmers. Corvée labor was another direct impact of governance. During the inundation, when farming was impossible, men could be conscripted for state projects. This could mean months away from home, hard labor on monuments or canals, though workers were fed and housed. Avoidance was punished, and scribes tracked who owed labor service. The military also represented state power. Egypt maintained an army, used not just for foreign wars, but also for internal security, police functions, and sometimes as labor for projects. Military service was required of able-bodied men, though the wealthy could sometimes avoid it. Governance was personal and paternal in ideology. The pharaoh was the shepherd of his people, responsible for their welfare. Officials were to act as fathers to their subordinates. This paternalistic model meant governance was top-down, but also implied reciprocal obligations, protection and provision in exchange for obedience and service. Ma'at was the ideological foundation of law and governance. Laws and judgments were supposed to reflect Ma'at. Unjust judges and corrupt officials were violations of Ma'at, threatening cosmic order. This gave even the powerless some moral leverage. They could appeal to Ma'at against injustice. In practice, law and governance in ancient Egypt combined ideals with human realities. The system aspired to justice, but didn't always achieve it. It provided order and structure, resolving disputes and punishing crimes, but also reflected and reinforced social hierarchies. For the individual Egyptian, the law was something to navigate, seeking its protection when needed, avoiding its punishments, and understanding that living in Ma'at meant living according to social and cosmic order as Egyptian civilization defined it. Chapter 13: The Cycle of Life: Birth, Childhood, and Coming of Age. Life in ancient Egypt followed rhythms as old as humanity itself: birth, growth, maturation, aging, and death. Yet how Egyptians experienced these universal stages was shaped by their particular culture, beliefs, and circumstances. Let us journey through the life cycle of an ancient Egyptian, from the first breath to the threshold of adulthood. Birth was both a joyous occasion and a dangerous one. Infant and maternal mortality were high, making every successful birth a cause for gratitude to the gods. When a woman realized she was pregnant, she took precautions to protect herself and her unborn child. Amulets became her constant companions. Images of Bes, the fierce dwarf god who protected children and mothers, and Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, were worn constantly. These gods were not grand deities of the official pantheon, but popular protective deities, close to people's daily concerns. As birth approached, the woman might consult medical texts or midwives for advice. Medical papyri contain pregnancy tests. A woman would urinate on emmer and barley seeds. If they sprouted, she was pregnant, and which sprouted first might indicate the child's sex. While seemingly magical, this test had a grain of truth, as pregnant women's urine does contain hormones that might affect seed germination. Medicines and spells were used to prevent miscarriage and ease pregnancy. A woman might wear special amulets, avoid certain foods or activities considered dangerous, and make offerings to protective deities. When labor began, the woman didn't go to a hospital. Those didn't exist. She remained at home, probably in a special birthing area, perhaps a bower made of papyrus stems and mats set up on the roof or in a courtyard. The structure's connection to papyrus, a plant of regeneration and life, was symbolic. Midwives attended the birth. These were experienced women, often having born children themselves, who knew traditional birthing practices. The laboring woman would squat on birthing bricks, 2 or 4 bricks that allowed her to squat while supporting herself, using gravity to assist the birth. This position was more effective than lying flat, as later medical practice rediscovered. During labor, spells were recited, calling on gods for protection. Amulets surrounded the birthing area. Other women might be present, supporting, encouraging, and assisting the midwife. Medicinal drinks might be given to ease pain or speed labor, though their effectiveness is questionable. If the birth went well, the newborn emerged, was cleaned, and the umbilical cord was cut. The infant was examined for signs of health. The mother was cared for, the afterbirth delivered, and both mother and child watched carefully in the crucial first hours and days. But many births didn't go well. Breech births, twins, prolonged labor, hemorrhage, and infections killed mothers and babies. Medical texts acknowledge limits: an ailment I cannot treat. When medicine failed, prayer and divine mercy were the only hopes. The death of a mother in childbirth or an infant shortly after birth was tragically common, leaving families in mourning instead of celebration. If mother and child survived, celebrations followed. The child was named, usually a few days after birth. Egyptian names often honored gods or expressed hopes and thanks. Amenhotep means Amun is pleased. Nefertiti means the beautiful one has come. Seneb means healthy. Names were believed to have power. A person's name was an essential part of their soul, and to erase someone's name was to harm them spiritually. Childhood in ancient Egypt was valued. Unlike some ancient societies that viewed children as mere economic units, Egyptians celebrated childhood. Tomb paintings show children at play, family scenes depict parents with children affectionately, and texts express genuine parental love. However, infant mortality meant that perhaps a third of children died before age 5. Parents couldn't take their children's survival for granted. This reality shaped how childhood was experienced, with constant vigilance against disease, accidents, and malevolent forces believed to threaten children. Young children wore amulets constantly. The distinctive side lock of youth hairstyle, where the head was shaved except for one long lock at the side, marked children. Boys and girls both wore this style. Clothing was minimal. Children often went naked, practical in the hot climate and economical for poor families. Toys and games show that children played. Archaeologists have found dolls made of wood, clay, or rags, with movable limbs and wigs. Toy animals, some on wheels, were pulled along on strings. Balls made of leather or papyrus were thrown and caught. Board games like Sonnet were played, and children had simplified versions. Children played active games. They played leapfrog, tug-of-war, and various running and chasing games. They wrestled and engaged in mock combat. Girls played with dolls, boys with toy weapons and chariots. Some games had ritual or religious significance, preparing children for adult roles. But childhood wasn't only play. Children began learning and working from an early age. By 5 or 6, children were expected to help with household tasks. Girls helped their mothers, carrying water, grinding grain, spinning thread, watching younger siblings. Boys helped their fathers, in the fields, in workshops, tending animals, running errands. Education, for those who received it, began in middle childhood. Sons of scribes, officials, and prosperous families might be sent to school around age 7. The education was rigorous, as we've discussed, learning to read and write, mastering arithmetic, memorizing texts. For most boys, education meant apprenticeship in their father's trade, learning by doing from childhood through adolescence. Girls' education was domestic. They learned the skills needed to manage households, cooking, textile production, childcare, managing resources. For elite girls, this might include management of large estates, supervision of servants, and social skills for entertaining. Literacy for girls was rare, but not unknown. Some women could read and write, particularly royal women or priestesses. Discipline was strict. Texts advise corporal punishment. The ear of a boy is on his back. He listens when he is beaten. This wasn't considered abuse, but necessary education. The goal was to shape children into proper adults who understood their roles and responsibilities. Yet affection coexisted with discipline. Love poetry and letters showed genuine emotional bonds between parents and children. Tomb inscriptions express grief for children who died young. Parents' hopes and fears for their children are palpable across the millennia. Coming of age was not marked by a single ceremony, like modern bar mitzvahs or quinceañeras, but by gradual transitions. For boys, circumcision around puberty was a rite of passage, literally depicted in tomb reliefs. The procedure was performed without anesthesia, a test of courage and a mark of entering manhood. For girls, the onset of menstruation marked transition toward womanhood. Preparations for marriage and independent adult life intensified. Skills were refined. Trousseau items might be accumulated. Marriage typically occurred in mid to late teens, though arrangements might be made earlier. For most people, marriage was not a formal ceremony, but an agreement to cohabit as husband and wife. A young couple would set up household together, beginning adult life. For elite youth, coming of age meant assuming responsibilities. A young man might begin working in the family profession or administration. A young woman might be married to form political or economic alliances between families. Royal children had even more structured paths, prepared from childhood for their future roles. The transition to adulthood was not instantaneous, but gradual. A youth would take on more responsibilities, be trusted with more important tasks, and gradually be recognized as a full adult member of society. For boys, this might coincide with completing apprenticeship, beginning independent work, or starting military service. For girls, it usually coincided with marriage and especially with bearing children, the full realization of female adulthood. Throughout this life cycle, from birth through coming of age, Egyptian beliefs about childhood and proper development shaped experiences. Children were seen as blessings from the gods, needing protection, guidance, and education. The goal was to produce adults who would fulfill their roles in society, maintain ma'at, and continue the eternal rhythms of Egyptian life. Childhood, for all its dangers and hardships by modern standards, was also a time valued and celebrated. The images of children in Egyptian art, playing, helping parents, or simply being held lovingly, remind us that across vast spans of time, parental love and the preciousness of children are constants of human experience. The Egyptian child growing up along the Nile, learning ancient skills, playing ancient games, and gradually becoming part of eternal Egypt lived a childhood both foreign to us and yet fundamentally recognizable in its humanity. Chapter 14. Love and Marriage, Family Life Along the Nile. The family was the fundamental social unit in ancient Egypt, and love and marriage shaped personal happiness and social stability. Let us explore how Egyptians found love, formed families, and navigated the intimate relationships that gave meaning to daily life. Love in ancient Egypt was celebrated in ways that might surprise us. Egyptian love poetry, surviving from the New Kingdom, is remarkably passionate and personal. These poems express genuine emotion, longing, desire, joy, and heartache. They compare lovers to flowers, gazelles, and other beautiful things. They speak candidly of physical attraction and emotional connection. One poem has a young woman declaring, "My brother, it is pleasant to go to the pond to bathe in your presence, so I may let you see my beauty in my tunic of finest linen, when it is wet. I go down into the water with you and come out to you again with a red fish, which is just right in my fingers. I set it before you." The sensuality is evident, though brother and sister here are terms of endearment for lovers, not actual siblings. Another poem has a young man pining, "7 days from yesterday I have not seen my sister, and sickness has entered into me. Her presence is the only thing that will make me well. When I see her, then I am well. When she opens her eyes, my body becomes young again. When she speaks, I grow strong." These poems show that romantic love was understood and valued. Egyptians didn't view marriage as merely an economic or social arrangement, though it was that. They believed in emotional and physical compatibility between partners. Courtship practices are less well documented than love poetry, but we can infer some patterns. Young people probably met through family connections, community events, festivals, and daily activities. The village well, where women drew water, might be a meeting place. Religious festivals brought communities together. Markets provided opportunities for encounters. Families were involved in arranging marriages, especially for elite families where alliances mattered. But evidence suggests that young people had some say. Love matches certainly occurred, as the poetry attests. A young man might see a young woman, be smitten, and seek ways to meet her. Intermediaries might arrange introductions. Families would discuss suitability based on social status, economic prospects, and personal qualities. Marriage itself was a private matter, not requiring state or religious ceremony. A couple would decide to marry, their families would agree, and the couple would begin living together. A marriage contract might be drawn up, specifying what property each brought to the marriage and how it would be divided if the marriage ended, but this wasn't legally required. The bride might move into the groom's family home, or the couple might establish their own household, depending on circumstances. Among the elite, marriage often involved elaborate celebrations, feasts, gifts, festivities. For ordinary people, it might be simpler, but still marked by family gatherings and celebrations. Marriage was monogamous for most Egyptians. A man had one wife. However, powerful men, especially royalty and high nobles, might have multiple wives and concubines. The pharaoh had a large harem, both for diplomatic reasons, foreign princesses sent as wives to cement alliances, and for personal ones. But for the average Egyptian, polygamy was impractical and unnecessary. One wife was the norm. The ideal marriage was companionate and affectionate. Tomb art often shows couples together, side by side or embracing. Inscriptions call wives beloved, mistress of the house, sweet of love. Men's tomb autobiographies praise their wives. Women's titles honor their roles as wives and mothers. Mutual respect and affection were the ideal, if not always the reality. Husbands and wives had defined roles, but there was more flexibility than in some cultures. The husband was provider and protector, responsible for supporting the family through his work. The wife was manager of the household, responsible for domestic production, food preparation, textile work, supervising servants, if any, and raising children. But these roles could overlap and adapt to circumstances. Women's economic independence gave them significant power within marriage. They owned property separately from their husbands. They could engage in business. If the marriage ended, they kept their property. This prevented women from being entirely dependent and gave them leverage within the marriage. Sexuality within marriage was viewed positively. Several medical and magical texts deal with enhancing sexual performance or attractiveness. Aphrodisiacs were believed in. Recipes survive for love potions. Fertility was highly valued, both for personal fulfillment and for practical reasons. Children were labor and old age security. However, adultery was considered a serious offense, particularly for women. A woman's adultery could lead to divorce, punishment, and social disgrace. Men's extramarital relations were viewed more leniently, typical of ancient patriarchal societies, though still not approved. Double standards existed, but faithful marriage was the ideal for both partners. Divorce was possible and not uncommon. Either party could initiate it, though women needed good cause, abandonment, abuse, failure to provide, while men had more latitude. Divorced women retained their property and could remarry. Children usually stayed with the mother. Divorce carried some social stigma, especially for women, but wasn't devastating. Remarriage after divorce or widowhood was common and acceptable. Life expectancy was short. Many people outlived multiple spouses. A widow or widower with children needed a partner for economic and practical reasons. Remarriage provided security and companionship. Children were the expected fruit of marriage, and childlessness was a source of great sorrow. Couples desperately wanted children, particularly sons, to carry on the family name and perform funerary rites. Medical texts and magical spells address infertility. Women prayed to gods, especially Hathor and Taweret, for children. Adoption was possible if biological children didn't come. Yet the love between spouses was not dependent solely on children. The love poetry speaks of lovers before they have children. Tomb inscriptions praise spouses' personal qualities, not just their reproductive success. Companionship, affection, and mutual support were valued in themselves. Family life centered on the home. For most people, the household was small: parents, children, perhaps an elderly grandparent or unmarried sibling. Extended families lived nearby, in the same village or neighborhood, providing a support network, but usually not sharing a household. Daily routines brought families together. Meals were eaten together. Evening hours after work were family time. Religious observances at the household shrine involved the whole family. Special occasions, births, marriages, funerals, brought extended family together. Relationships between parents and children were affectionate but hierarchical. Respect for parents was a cardinal virtue. Texts emphasized duties to care for aging parents. Grown children supported elderly parents, providing food, shelter, and care. This was both moral obligation and practical insurance. Parents raised children expecting them to provide old age care. Sibling relationships were important, especially in childhood when siblings were constant companions and playmates. Adult siblings might work together, support each other, and maintain close ties throughout life. Inheritance disputes could strain sibling relationships, but ideally, siblings remained close. Relationships beyond the nuclear family mattered. Grandparents, when they lived long enough, were respected elders. Aunts, uncles, and cousins formed a network of kin who could be called upon for help, labor exchange, and support. The village or neighborhood was an extended community where people knew each other, intermarried, and functioned as an extended family. Elite families had more complex dynamics. Multiple wives and concubines in wealthy households created complicated hierarchies. The chief wife, usually the first or highest status wife, had precedence. Children from different wives might compete for inheritance and favor. Royal families had elaborate succession politics, with different princes and their mothers vying for power. Yet even in elite families, there's evidence of genuine affection. Royal love poetry exists. Letters between royal couples express emotion. Akhenaten and Nefertiti were depicted in unusually intimate ways, showing affection for each other and their children, suggesting a genuine partnership even at the highest level. Homosexual relationships existed, though evidence is limited and interpretation debated. Some texts seem to reference same-sex relations, sometimes neutrally, sometimes with disapproval. The story of Horus and Set includes homosexual encounters, though their meaning is debated. Two men, Neankanem and Khnumhotep, were buried together in a tomb showing them in intimate poses, suggesting a same-sex relationship, though interpretations vary. Egyptian society's attitudes toward homosexuality remain unclear, but it certainly existed. Family life was not always harmonious. Disputes arose over property, inheritance, behavior, and countless daily frictions. Divorce cases document abuse, abandonment, and incompatibility. Inheritance disputes ended up in court. Families feuded. Human nature ensured that conflict was part of family life as much as affection. Yet the ideals were clear and widely shared. Love between spouses, respect between generations, loyalty among siblings, and support within the extended family. These ideals shaped behavior and provided standards against which to judge one's own and others' conduct. For the individual Egyptian, family was the primary source of identity, security, and meaning. One was defined by family connections: son of, daughter of, husband of, father of. One's social status derived largely from family. One's economic security depended on family networks. One's happiness was found largely within family relationships. And ultimately, family transcended even death. The deceased hoped to be reunited with loved ones in the afterlife. Tomb paintings show idealized families together in paradise. The living maintained connections with dead family members through offerings and prayers at tombs. Family was not just for this life, but eternal, continuing beyond death into the infinite existence the Egyptians believed awaited them. Love and marriage in ancient Egypt were thus deeply personal and profoundly social. They connected individuals to each other emotionally and physically, and they connected those individuals to the broader social structures of Egyptian civilization. In the embrace of lovers, in the laughter of children, in the shared work of daily life, Egyptians found joy, meaning, and the human warmth that made life along the Nile not just bearable, but beautiful. Chapter 15: The Setting Sun, Aging, Death, and the Journey to Eternity. Every life, no matter how lived, moves toward the same destination: death. But for the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending, but a transformation, a doorway to eternity. How they approached aging, death, and the afterlife profoundly shaped their daily lives. Let us walk this final stretch of the human journey as the Egyptians understood it. Old age, when one was fortunate enough to reach it, was respected. The elders were elders, venerable ones, whose wisdom and experience were valued. Gray hair and wrinkled skin were marks of survival, proof of divine favor. To reach old age meant one had lived well, pleased the gods, and enjoyed Ma'at's protection. Yet old age brought challenges. Without modern medicine, age-related ailments were untreatable. Arthritis crippled joints, vision failed, hearing dimmed. Teeth, worn by gritty bread, caused constant pain or fell out, making eating difficult. Memory might fade. Physical strength declined. The vigorous young person became dependent on others. Family care for the elderly was expected. Grown children housed and fed aging parents. Medical texts address ailments of the elderly, offering treatments for arthritis, digestive problems, and other age-related conditions, though relief was limited. Comfortable old age depended on having children willing and able to provide care. For those without family or whose families couldn't or wouldn't help, old age could be miserable. Begging or dependence on community charity might be the only options. Texts sometimes mention the plight of the elderly poor, suggesting this was a recognized social problem. Death could come suddenly: accident, acute illness, violence, or gradually through age or chronic disease. When death approached, preparations began. For the wealthy, this meant ensuring the tomb was ready, that funerary goods were prepared, that arrangements were made. For the poor, it meant simpler preparations, but still ensuring proper burial. The moment of death was significant. Family gathered if possible, final words might be spoken, blessings given or requested. When breathing stopped and the heart ceased beating, professional mourners might be summoned, women who would begin the wailing and lamentation that marked death. The deceased's journey to the afterlife began immediately. The body needed preservation, the soul needed guidance. These twin concerns drove Egyptian funerary practices, which ranged from elaborate for the wealthy to simple for the poor, but were universal in intent. For the wealthy, embalmers were called. The body was taken to their workshop, the place of purification. Over 70 days, the complex process of mummification unfolded, which we've touched on earlier. The goal was to preserve the body perfectly, for the soul needed a physical anchor. The heart remained, the brain was discarded, other organs were preserved separately in canopic jars. Desiccation in natron, anointing with oils, wrapping in hundreds of yards of linen with protective amulets between layers, all aimed at creating a purified, eternal body. The poor couldn't afford full mummification. Their bodies might receive simpler treatment, wrapping in linen, placement in dry sand, burial with minimal ceremony. But even the poorest deserved basic funeral rites. Communities ensured that everyone received burial, for to be left unburied was a fate worse than death, condemning the soul to restless wandering. During the 70 days of mummification, the family mourned. Men grew their beards, women disheveled their hair, tore their garments, and threw dust on their heads. Professional mourners, women who made lamenting their trade, were hired to wail and weep, amplifying the family's grief. The louder and more dramatic the mourning, the more honor shown to the deceased. Funeral processions were somber spectacles. The mummy, in its decorated coffin, was placed on a sledge and dragged by oxen to the tomb. Family members followed. Priests in ritual garments led the way, reciting spells. Professional mourners wailed. Servants carried funerary goods, furniture, food, drink, clothes, jewelry, shabbatis, and everything the deceased might need in the afterlife. At the tomb, the crucial opening of the mouth ceremony was performed. Using ritual tools, an adze, a peshesh kef knife, and others, priests touched the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose, symbolically restoring its ability to breathe, see, hear, speak, and eat. Spells were recited, incense burned, offerings presented. This ritual reanimated the corpse, transforming it from a dead body into a living spirit. The mummy was then placed in the tomb. For the wealthy, this meant a rock-cut tomb or mastaba with multiple chambers. The burial chamber held the sarcophagus with the mummy inside. Other rooms held funerary goods, furniture, food, drink, clothes, jewelry, shabbatis, and everything the deceased might need in the afterlife. For the poor, burial might be in a simple pit grave in the desert, the body wrapped in linen or matting, placed with a few pottery vessels containing food and drink. But even these simple graves show care, the body positioned carefully, goods provided, attention paid to proper burial. The tomb sealed, offerings were left: bread, beer, meat, vegetables, flowers. These offerings would be repeated regularly, daily for the very wealthy, on festivals and anniversaries for most. The living were obligated to feed the dead, maintaining them in the afterlife. But the deceased's journey was not over. According to Egyptian belief, the soul had to navigate the dangers of the underworld, the duat, to reach the Hall of Two Truths where judgment occurred. Spells in the Book of the Dead, scrolls placed with mummies, guided the deceased through this perilous journey. The soul might encounter demons, serpents, and hostile beings. Each obstacle required the right spell, the correct knowledge to pass. Gates had guardians who demanded passwords. The deceased needed to name them correctly. O far strider who came forth from Heliopolis, I have done no falsehood. O fire embracer who came forth from Karaha, I have not robbed. These negative confessions asserted innocence of 42 sins. Finally came the judgment. In the Hall of Two Truths, before Osiris, Lord of the Dead, the deceased's heart was placed on a scale balanced against the feather of Ma'at. Anubis, jackal-headed god of embalming, managed the scales. Thoth, ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded the result. Amit, you devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waited to consume those who failed. If the heart balanced with the feather, the deceased was true of voice, justified, vindicated. Osiris declared, "Let him go forth into the day." The deceased proceeded to the field of reeds, an idealized Egypt where crops grew abundantly, the Nile always flooded perfectly, and one enjoyed eternal life in paradise. But if the heart was heavy with sin, outweighing the feather, Amit devoured it. The soul was annihilated, suffering the second death, true death from which there was no return. This was the ultimate terror, oblivion, non-existence. This belief in judgment encouraged ethical behavior in life. One's deeds mattered. The negative confessions listed sins to avoid: murder, theft, lying, adultery, cheating, oppression, blasphemy. Living in ma'at, truthfully and justly, ensured a light heart at judgment. The afterlife itself, for those who passed judgment, was conceived as idealized earthly life. The field of reeds was Egypt at its best: fertile fields, abundant harvests, comfortable homes, plenty of food and drink. The deceased lived as they had in life, but without hardship, pain, or death. Work was still necessary: plowing, planting, harvesting, but shabtis, magical servants from the tomb, would come to life and do the work when called. The deceased could also enjoy pleasures: feasts, music, lovemaking. They could visit the living, though interaction was limited. They could receive offerings, sustaining their eternal existence. Yet the dead were not entirely separate from the living. Offerings at tombs maintained connections. The living could pray to the dead, asking for their help as spirits who now had access to divine powers. Letters to the dead, written on pottery bowls left at tombs, asked deceased relatives to intercede in problems, resolve disputes, or protect the living. Conversely, the dead could trouble the living if neglected. Restless spirits might cause illness or misfortune. Bad dreams might be messages from angry dead. Proper care of tombs and offerings prevented these problems. Death rituals continued beyond burial. Festivals of the dead brought families to necropolises with offerings and celebrations. The beautiful Festival of the Valley saw Theban families visiting West Bank tombs, spending the night, feasting, drinking, celebrating with their deceased loved ones. Death didn't sever family bonds, but transformed them. Royal funerals were grander than commoners, but followed similar patterns. Pharaohs had massive tombs: pyramids in the Old and Middle Kingdom, rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings in the New Kingdom, filled with incredible treasures. The funeral was a state occasion, the entire court participating. But the goal was the same: preserving the body, providing for the afterlife, ensuring successful judgment and eternal life. The Egyptian attitude toward death was paradoxical. They feared it, developing elaborate practices to overcome it. Yet they also accepted it, understanding it as natural transformation. They invested enormous resources in funerary preparations, but also advised enjoying life. Follow your heart while you live. Put myrrh on your head, dress in fine linen, make holiday, and do not weary of it. This balance, preparing for death while enjoying life, characterized the Egyptian worldview. Death's inevitability made life precious. Life's pleasures were to be savored, but always with an eye toward eternity. Every action in life had consequences in death. The two were inseparably linked. For the individual Egyptian, awareness of death shaped daily life. Building a tomb, accumulating funerary goods, living ethically to ensure a light heart at judgment, maintaining family tombs, and making offerings. These obligations framed existence. Yet they didn't make life morbid but purposeful. Life mattered because it determined eternal fate. In the end, every Egyptian hoped for the same blessing. May you be buried in your tomb in your mountain of eternity. May offerings be made for you. May your name live upon earth. May you rest in your place in the west. May you go forth into the day to see the sun disk. To live well, die properly, be buried with care, judged favorably, and enjoy eternity. This was the Egyptian dream, the hope that gave meaning to all the struggles and joys of daily life along the Nile. Conclusion: The Eternal Nile, Reflections on a Timeless Civilization. Our journey through daily life in ancient Egypt comes to its close, but the story of this remarkable civilization continues to resonate across the millennia. We have walked with farmers through their fields, sat with scribes as they practiced their craft, visited the homes of nobles and the huts of workers. witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. We have tried to understand what it meant to live as an Egyptian, to see the world through their eyes, to feel the rhythms of their days and years. What have we learned? Perhaps most fundamentally, that the ancient Egyptians were neither alien nor primitive, but fully human, grappling with the same essential questions and experiences that define humanity in any age. They loved and grieved, hoped and feared, worked and rested, dreamed and despaired. They found joy in simple pleasures, good food, cool water on a hot day, the laughter of children, the embrace of a beloved. They faced challenges we recognize, making a living, raising families, dealing with difficult neighbors, coping with illness and loss. Yet they were also distinctly Egyptian, shaped by their unique circumstances. The Nile gave them their world, a narrow ribbon of fertility running through endless desert. This geography shaped everything: their economy, based on agriculture, their religion, celebrating fertility and fearing chaos, their very sense of order as something precious and precarious, constantly threatened by the desert's disorder. The concept of Ma'at, that fundamental Egyptian idea of truth, justice, and cosmic order, permeated every aspect of life. It wasn't merely an abstract philosophical concept, but a living reality that shaped daily decisions. To live in Ma'at meant to do one's job properly, treat others fairly, honor the gods, maintain traditions, and accept one's place in the social hierarchy. This created a deeply conservative society that changed slowly, valuing continuity over innovation, tradition over novelty. This conservatism was both strength and limitation. It gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability, allowing it to endure for over 3,000 years, longer than any other ancient civilization. The basic patterns of life we've explored, the agricultural cycle, the social structure, the religious beliefs, the artistic conventions, remained recognizable across millennia. An Egyptian from the Old Kingdom, transported to the New Kingdom 1,000 years later, would have found much that was familiar. Yet, this same conservatism could be stifling. Innovation, when it occurred, had to be framed as recovering ancient wisdom rather than creating something new. Radical changes, like Akhenaten's religious revolution, were rejected and erased. The system's emphasis on order and tradition left little room for questioning or fundamental change. The social hierarchy, which we've seen shaped every aspect of life, was accepted as natural and divinely ordained. Modern sensibilities rebel against such rigid inequality, but Egyptians generally accepted it as part of Ma'at. The pharaoh was a living god, not a tyrant usurping power. Officials were servants of order, not oppressors. Even slaves had their place in the cosmic scheme. This doesn't mean injustice didn't exist or wasn't recognized. Texts do complain about corrupt officials and harsh treatment, but the system itself wasn't questioned. Women's status in ancient Egypt is noteworthy. Compared to many ancient societies, Egyptian women enjoyed significant rights: owning property, conducting business, initiating divorce, testifying in court. Yet they were still subordinate to men in most contexts, their primary roles defined as wives and mothers. Elite women could wield power, but this was exceptional. Most women's lives were constrained by biology, the dangers of childbirth, the demands of child-rearing, and by social expectations. Religion permeated Egyptian life in ways modern secular societies struggle to comprehend. The gods were not distant beings worshipped on special occasions, but constant presences involved in every aspect of existence. Prayer, offerings, amulets, and spells were daily practices, not exceptional acts. The afterlife wasn't a vague hope, but a detailed expectation, prepared for throughout life. This religious worldview gave meaning and purpose, but also imposed obligations and fears. The craftsmanship and artistic achievement of the Egyptians remain astonishing. The pyramids, temples, statues, jewelry, and countless other objects display technical skill and aesthetic sensibility of the highest order. These weren't merely utilitarian objects, but embodiments of meaning, beauty, serving religious and social purposes. The craftsmen who created these wonders were skilled professionals, proud of their work, their contributions essential to Egyptian civilization. Daily life, which has been our focus, might seem mundane compared to the grand monuments and dramatic historical events, but it's in the everyday experiences that we find the true texture of Egyptian civilization. The bread baked in countless homes, the children playing in dusty streets, the farmers watching the Nile rise, the scribes bent over their papyri, the lovers exchanging glances, the families gathered for evening meals. These were the moments that filled Egyptian lives, the experiences that mattered most to the people who lived them. What can we, living in a world so different from theirs, take from this exploration? Perhaps several things. First, perspective. Our modern way of life, which seems so natural and inevitable, is actually quite recent and unusual. For most of human history, including the 3 millennia of Egyptian civilization, people lived very differently. This should make us both appreciate what we have and question what we assume. Second, humility. The Egyptians built a civilization that lasted longer than ours has yet existed, created works of art that still move us, and developed knowledge and wisdom that still has value. We are not necessarily wiser or better than they were, just different, shaped by different circumstances and possessing different knowledge. Third, connection. Despite the vast differences in technology, society, and worldview, the ancient Egyptians were people like us. Their loves and hates, hopes and fears, joys and sorrows resonate with our own. We can see ourselves in them, and seeing them helps us understand ourselves. The Nile still flows, as it did in ancient times, though now controlled by dams that would have amazed the ancient engineers. The sun still rises over the desert and sets beyond the western mountains. The basic geography remains, though the people and their ways have changed beyond recognition. Modern Egypt is a different civilization, Islamic rather than pharaonic, Arabic-speaking rather than using ancient Egyptian, connected to the modern world rather than isolated in antiquity. Yet the ancient past is still present. The monuments remain, weathered but enduring, testament to the civilization that created them. Museums around the world hold treasures from Egyptian tombs, daily objects, and priceless artworks alike. Scholars continue to study the texts, unraveling more of the Egyptian story. And in the modern Egyptians themselves, there may be genetic and cultural threads connecting them to their ancient predecessors, though transformed by millennia of history. For us, exploring daily life in ancient Egypt is an act of imagination and scholarship, reconstructing a vanished world from fragmentary evidence. We can never fully know what it felt like to be an ancient Egyptian, to live entirely within their worldview, to experience their world with their assumptions and beliefs. But we can try, and in trying, we expand our own understanding and sympathy. As we conclude this journey, imagine one final scene. The sun is setting over the Nile, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A farmer walks home from the fields, tired but satisfied with the day's work. Children playing in the dust before a small mud brick house. A woman is grinding grain, the rhythmic sound marking time. The smell of baking bread drifts on the evening air. In the distance, a temple's pylon catches the last light, its carved figures of gods and kings standing eternal watch. This is Egypt. Not the Egypt of pharaohs and pyramids alone, but the Egypt of ordinary people living ordinary lives. The Egypt that endured day by day, generation after generation, for thousands of years. This is the Egypt we have tried to visit, to understand, to honor. Their world is gone, but not entirely lost. Through archaeology, through scholarship, through imagination, we can still walk the banks of the ancient Nile, still hear the voices of its people, still feel the pulse of one of humanity's most remarkable civilization. May their memory endure, as they hoped it would. May the bread and beer they offered to their gods and ancestors nourish our understanding. May their words, written in hieroglyphs on stone and papyrus, continue to speak across time. May their lives, lived so long ago in a world so different from ours, remind us of our common humanity and our connection to all people who have ever lived. The journey ends, but the Nile flows on, eternal and unchanging, carrying with it the memories of all who have lived along its banks. And in that eternal flow, the ancient Egyptians live still, not in flesh, but in memory, in the monuments they left, in the words they wrote, and in our continued fascination with their remarkable civilization. Thank you for walking this path with me, for imagining these ancient lives, for taking this calm journey through history. May you carry something of Egypt with you as you return to your own time and place. And may you look at your own daily life with fresh eyes, recognizing that you, too, are living history, creating the daily life that future generations might one day study and try to understand. The sun sets on our journey, the Nile flows on, and ancient Egypt, though vanished, remains eternal in memory and understanding. Farewell, traveler, until we meet again on another journey through time. Epilogue: The legacy lives on. Though our detailed exploration of daily life in ancient Egypt has concluded, it is worth spending a few more moments reflecting on the legacy of this civilization and why it continues to fascinate us today, thousands of years after the last pharaoh ruled. Ancient Egypt left an indelible mark on human civilization. Its influence extended far beyond its borders, even in ancient times. The Greeks and Romans admired Egyptian wisdom, adopted some Egyptian gods into their pantheons, and were influenced by Egyptian art and architecture. The Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek rulers of Egypt after Alexander's conquest, blended Greek and Egyptian cultures, creating a unique fusion. Egyptian knowledge, particularly in medicine, mathematics, and engineering, was transmitted through the Mediterranean world. The Library of Alexandria, built by Greeks, collected and preserved Egyptian texts along with works from across the known world, becoming the ancient world's greatest center of learning. The biblical traditions show Egyptian influence. The Hebrews' time in Egypt, whether historically accurate in all details or not, shaped Israelite identity and appears throughout the Hebrew Bible. Moses, raised in Pharaoh's court, supposedly learned Egyptian wisdom. The Psalms show influence from Egyptian hymns. When Christianity emerged, Egypt became a crucial center. The Coptic Church, one of Christianity's oldest branches, preserved Egyptian language in modified form and maintained traditions linking back to pharaonic times through the Greco-Roman period. Egyptian monasticism, beginning with the Desert Fathers and Mothers, shaped Christian spirituality worldwide. The Islamic conquest brought Arabic language and culture, transforming Egypt again. Yet medieval Arabic scholars preserved knowledge of ancient Egypt even if they couldn't read hieroglyphs. The pyramids, sphinx, and temples remained mysterious and impressive, inspiring legends and speculation. The Renaissance sparked renewed European interest in Egypt. Travelers brought back artifacts and descriptions. The Hermetic tradition, claiming roots in Egyptian wisdom attributed to Thoth, influenced Western esoteric thought. Symbols like the pyramid and the eye became part of Western iconography, appearing even on the U.S. dollar bill. Napoleon's invasion of Egypt in 1798 brought scholars who documented monuments systematically. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone, with its inscription in hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek, provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphs. Jean-François Champollion's breakthrough in the 1820s opened Egyptian texts to modern scholarship, beginning the field of Egyptology. The 19th and early 20th century saw massive excavation and, unfortunately, plundering of Egyptian sites. Museums worldwide filled with Egyptian artifacts, from colossal statues to the humblest potsherds. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 sparked worldwide Egyptomania, influencing fashion, architecture, and popular culture. Modern Egyptology, far more ethical and scientific than early treasure hunting, continues to reveal new insights. New tombs are discovered, new texts are translated, new technologies, satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, digital reconstruction allow us to see ancient Egypt in ways impossible before. Why does Egypt fascinate us so? Perhaps because it represents human achievement at a grand scale. The pyramids, built 4,500 years ago with Bronze Age technology, still impress. The civilization's longevity, 3 millennia, surpasses anything since. The art's beauty and sophistication speak across time. The mysteries, how exactly were the pyramids built? What really happened to Akhenaten? What lies in undiscovered tombs? Tantalize. But perhaps more deeply, ancient Egypt fascinates because it shows us human possibility. Here was a civilization that, with the simplest tools and materials, created lasting wonders. They developed sophisticated understanding of medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. They created a rich literary and religious tradition. They built a stable society that endured through centuries of change. Yet, they were also deeply human, as we've seen in exploring daily life. They struggled with the same issues we do, making a living, raising families, finding meaning, coping with mortality. Their solutions were different from ours, but the problems were the same. This connects us to them across the gulf of time. For modern Egyptians, the pharaonic past is complex heritage. It's a source of national pride, evidence of Egypt's historical importance and contribution to civilization. Yet, it's also foreign, a pre-Islamic, pre-Christian past that doesn't fit easily into Islamic or Coptic identity. The relationship between modern Egypt and its ancient past involves negotiation between honoring heritage and maintaining current religious and cultural identity. For the rest of the world, ancient Egypt has become part of shared human heritage. The monuments and artifacts are protected by international agreements. Scholars from every continent study Egypt. Museums worldwide display Egyptian collections. The interest is universal, transcending cultures and nations. What would the ancient Egyptians think of all this? They built their monuments for eternity, wrote their names to last forever, prepared their tombs to preserve their bodies and memories endlessly. In a sense, they succeeded beyond even their own expectations. They wanted to be remembered, and remembered they are, far more widely than they could have imagined. Yet, would they recognize our understanding of them? Our scientific, secular approach to their sacred monuments and texts, our display of their mummified bodies in museums, our scholarly analysis of their most intimate beliefs, all this would likely shock them. We honor them, but in our own way, not theirs. Still, this continued engagement with ancient Egypt, this ongoing conversation across millennia, is its own kind of afterlife. The Egyptians believed the dead lived on as long as their names were spoken, their memories maintained. By that measure, the ancient Egyptians have achieved immortality. We speak their names: Khufu, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses. We maintain their monuments. We tell their stories. And in exploring their daily lives, as we have done in this journey, we grant them a different kind of immortality. Not just the pharaohs and nobles whose tombs dominate Egyptology, but the farmers and craftsmen, the women and children, the scribes and priests, whose names we often don't know, but whose lives we can partially reconstruct. They too deserve to be remembered, their ordinary but precious lives acknowledged and honored. As we truly conclude now, let us carry forward this sense of connection. When you see Egyptian artifacts in a museum, remember they were made by skilled hands for specific purposes. When you see images of Egyptian monuments, remember the workers who built them, stone by stone. When you read Egyptian texts, remember the scribes who wrote them and the audiences who heard them. And in your own daily life, recognize that you too are part of the human story. The daily life you live, though it may seem ordinary, is part of the great tapestry of human experience, connecting you to all who have lived before and all who will live after. The ancient Egyptians remind us that daily life, lived thoughtfully and well, is meaningful in itself and creates the civilization we share. The Nile flows on, the desert endures, the sun rises and sets. And the story of human life along the Nile, from the first farmers who settled its banks 7,000 years ago to the millions who live there today, continues to unfold. Ancient Egypt is one chapter in that story, perhaps the most remarkable, certainly the longest and most thoroughly documented. But it is a chapter that speaks to universal human experiences and aspirations. Thank you, once more, for this journey. May the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians, their love of life, their hope for eternity, their commitment to order and beauty, their deep humanity, inspire and enlighten you. May their story remind you that great civilizations are built not just by kings and heroes, but by ordinary people living their daily lives with dignity, purpose, and love. Walk in Ma'at. May your name live forever. May you go forth into the day. And may the peace of the eternal Nile be with you always.